Zygarnik effect of unfinished conversations. You know that feeling when someone walks away mid-sentence or you end a call right before saying something important. Your brain won't let it go. Hours later, you're replaying the conversation, imagining what you should have said, wondering what they meant. That loop is the Zygarnik effect at work. Your brain treats incomplete tasks like open circuits craving closure the way your body craves water. When a conversation ends abruptly, cuts off at a weird moment, or leaves real words unsaid, your mind keeps spinning it like a record with a skip. The other person lives in that gap. They become the missing piece your brain needs to complete the pattern. Here's what makes it sneaky. Your brain doesn't distinguish between we had a bad ending and we have unfinished potential. Both feel identical. Both create that pull. Someone says something vulnerable, then changes the subject. You part ways with tension still floating between you. A text goes unanswered. Every break in the conversation is a hook that holds your attention. This is partly why breakups feel so obsessive at first. The whole relationship becomes one giant, unfinished sentence. Your brain manufactures reasons to keep thinking about them, to find meaning in small signs, to construct scenarios where it all makes sense. The stickier part, if you want to actually let someone go, sometimes you need to finish the conversation, even if only in your own mind, with honest answers to what you needed to say. Closure doesn't always need their voice. Sometimes it just needs yours. Cliffhanger of the ambiguous goodbye. That one-word text, okay, sits in your inbox like a stone. No emoji, no warmth, just flatness. And now your brain won't stop. Did they mean it coldly? Are they pulling away? Is this the beginning of being ghosted, or are you just spiraling into thin air? The thing is, you cannot stop because there was no actual ending. This is the psychological cliffhanger. When someone leaves a conversation unresolved, when the goodbye stays blurry, when there's no full stop, your mind rewrites the next scene whether you want it to or not. It's the same mechanism that keeps you thinking about a movie with no real ending or a text that just trails off into nothing. Your brain hates empty space. It's a completion machine by design, and it will fill the void. The trap gets worse because ambiguity is strangely addictive. Certainty, even painful certainty, lets you actually move on. A clear rejection stings, sure, but then you grieve and build something new. But uncertainty keeps that door cracked open just enough. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're thinking about you too, maybe they'll circle back. That tiny maybe hooks you deep, and you'll pull that line for weeks. People who truly haunt your thoughts are usually the ones who never gave you a clean exit. A conversation interrupted mid-sentence, plans that fizzled with no explanation, a "we should hang soon" that died in limbo. Your brain reads unfinished business as unfinished potential, so you stay tethered, rewriting the ending they never gave you, waiting for the clarity that finally lets you close the book and exhale. Open loops in interrupted stories. You know that feeling when someone leaves mid-sentence and you can't stop replaying what they were about to say? Your brain hates unfinished business. It's not neediness or obsession, it's just wiring. When a conversation gets cut off, when a text goes unanswered, when someone walks away before the story resolves, your mind keeps spinning the wheels trying to close that gap. Psychologists call these open loops, and they create a kind of cognitive itch that demands scratching. Here's what happens. The person leaves you thinking about them because your brain literally cannot file them away as complete. A normal goodbye, a resolved conflict, a story with an ending. Your mind can shelve those, but an interrupted confession, an argument that never got settled, a conversation that just stopped, that stays hot. You replay it differently each time, imagining endings that might have been, wondering what they didn't get to say. Every replay is your brain's attempt to close something that feels fundamentally open. And if they were the kind of person who left things hanging before, if there's a pattern of them pulling away mid-story, your brain tags them as even more unfinished. It becomes automatic. The thought of them surfaces because there is still a narrative thread loose somewhere. The stickiness isn't always about them being special. Sometimes it's just about the story not having an ending yet. If you're stuck replaying something with them, consider whether what you're actually chasing is resolution, not the person. That small reframe might be the permission slip your brain needs to finally move on. Ovsiankina drive to resume. You know that feeling when you leave a conversation hanging, someone said something that stung, or you both just stopped mid-thought, and now your brain won't let it go, that loop running on repeat while you're trying to do literally anything else. That's the Ovsiankina effect, named after a 1920s Soviet psychologist who noticed something wild. Our minds hate unfinished business more than they like rest. Your brain treats an incomplete interaction like an open browser tab it's compelled to return to. It nags. It resurfaces at 2 a.m. It pulls your attention back like a fish on a line. The person you can't stop thinking about isn't necessarily special. You're just stuck in a psychological groove that demands closure. This is why people obsess over unsent messages, arguments that never got resolved, or conversations that ended abruptly. Your nervous system literally cannot file it away as done. It's not romantic yearning. It's not fate. It's a glitch in how your brain prioritizes threat and completion. The stickier the unfinished moment, the angrier you got. The more vulnerable you felt, the more you wanted to say something back. The louder the Ovsiankina drive screams. This is actually useful intel. If someone keeps creeping into your mind, ask yourself, what's actually unresolved here? Did you need to say something? Did they? Is there a conversation that needs a real ending, not just a fade out? Sometimes the person haunting your thoughts isn't the one you miss. They're just the one your brain hasn't processed yet. Find the loose thread and you'll find the off switch. Intermittent reinforcement of unpredictable replies. You text them Thursday morning and they reply within an hour. Friday, you get nothing for 12. Then Saturday at midnight, boom, a long message that makes your heart jump. This is not chaos. This is a slot machine. Your brain does not care that the payout is random. In fact, it cares more. Intermittent reinforcement ranks among behaviorists' most addictive patterns ever documented, and your crush has accidentally weaponized it. Every time you send a message, you do not know when or if they will reply, so your dopamine system stays on high alert. The uncertainty itself becomes the hook. You keep checking your phone. You keep thinking about what they meant by that emoji. You reread old conversations for clues, searching for the pattern that might predict the next reply. A person who replied instantly every single time would bore you, but someone who replies sometimes quickly, sometimes after days, that person becomes a mystery you cannot solve, and your brain abhors an unsolved mystery more than it abhors loneliness. The pattern rewires you whether they mean it or not. They could be busy, flaky, checking their phone once a day. Maybe they are just living, But your nervous system does not distinguish between carelessness and strategy. You have been trained, and the longer this rhythm beats, the tighter the habit loop grows until thinking about them stops feeling like choice and starts feeling like hunger. The hard truth sits quiet. If someone's replies feel like a slot machine, they are not your person yet. A person who wants you does not make you work that hard to find out. Variable ratio reward schedule. You know that feeling when someone texts you back quickly 3 times in a row, then disappears for hours, then suddenly floods your thread with 5 messages at once? That unpredictability is a slot machine, and your brain is the player pulling the lever. A variable ratio reward schedule is what casinos use to hook people, what social media algorithms weaponize, and what makes someone impossible to forget once they've got you hooked. The magic isn't consistency, it's randomness. Your brain doesn't just respond to reward, it responds most powerfully to the uncertainty of reward. The same dopamine hit that would feel expected and boring on schedule feels electric when it might come anytime or not at all. When someone gives you attention sporadically, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes vanishing for a week, then reappearing like nothing happened, your brain learns to stay hypervigilant. You check your phone more, you replay conversations more, you think about them more, always hunting for the next hit. The cruelest part is that intermittent attention actually strengthens attachment instead of weakening it. Studies on gambling and conditioning show the same thing. Uncertainty creates stickier bonds than reliability ever could. Your brain would rather chase an inconsistent person than settle into something stable because stable doesn't trigger that same ancient reward circuitry. If someone keeps you guessing, you're not attached because they're great. You're attached because your nervous system never quite knows when the reward is coming. Knowing this won't make you immune, but it might help you notice when you're spinning in that wheel instead of choosing actual connection. Curiosity gap of withheld information. Someone tells you they have something to talk about, but not right now. And suddenly, your brain is a search engine with nowhere to go. You replay the conversation. You imagine scenarios. You check your phone. The not knowing becomes a splinter you can't stop touching. This is the curiosity gap. When your mind detects missing information, it keeps running loops to fill it in, and that friction keeps the person attached to your thoughts like static. You are less likely to forget someone who left you hanging than someone who told you everything. The mystery works like a mental itch. Their silences, their half-finished sentences, that thing they almost said but didn't, it all hijacks your focus because your brain hates incomplete patterns. You want closure more than you want peace. And the person who gives you just enough information to wonder but not enough to settle becomes unforgettable, even if you don't like them much. The cruelest version of this happens in relationships where someone is deliberately vague or gives you breadcrumbs of attention. You keep coming back, hoping the next conversation will finally answer what they meant, what you did wrong, where you stand. But the withholding is often the point. It keeps you compliant, curious, and stuck in that unfinished loop. If you find yourself cycling through someone's words, asking your friends what they think something meant, or refreshing conversations looking for clues, pause and ask yourself, are you thinking about them because they matter, or are you trying to solve a puzzle they never intended to let you finish? Information gap theory of interest. Someone mentions a story they didn't finish, a reason they won't explain, a project wrapped in mystery, and suddenly your brain won't let it go. You're circling, filling blanks that aren't there, hungry for closure. That ache you feel is real. Curiosity has teeth. Here's what makes this brutal with people. The person who keeps you guessing becomes the person you can't stop thinking about, not because they're more interesting in any factual sense, but because your mind treats the missing information like an unsolved puzzle demanding a solution. A straightforward, transparent person might be reliable and kind, but your brain barely registers them. The person who shares selectively, who hints at depth without revealing it, who leaves you with questions, they take up all your mental real estate. You're not obsessing because you love them. You're obsessing because your brain is trying to complete an incomplete picture. Text message gaps destroy you this way. Vague social media posts hook you like they were designed to. Someone emotionally reserved feels more compelling than someone genuinely open. The uncertainty creates friction in your mind, and friction creates stickiness. This is information gap theory at work, and it's why half-told stories are more magnetic than finished ones. Here's the quiet truth. If you're stuck on someone, knowing the full answer, even if it disappoints, quiets your brain faster than any fantasy will. The closed loop stops demanding your attention. The open one never does. So if you're losing sleep over someone's mystery, remember that your need for answers is doing more work than their actual presence ever could. Fill in enough blanks, and the person you imagined starts to fade. Need for cognitive closure. You know that feeling when someone leaves mid-conversation and you can't move on? Your brain just keeps replaying it, searching for the moment that makes sense. That's cognitive closure at work, and it's ruthless. Your mind despises an unfinished story more than it fears a bad ending. Someone who ghosted you, someone who said something contradictory, someone who left things ambiguous, they become a puzzle your brain will not put down. Here's the mechanism. Your brain treats uncertainty like a physical threat. It burns energy trying to resolve it. Close a loop and your mind relaxes. Leave it open and you're stuck in a loop of your own making, replaying conversations, analyzing small comments, constructing theories about what they really meant. The person occupies your thoughts not because they're special, but because they represent an equation your brain never solved. This is why clean breakups, even painful ones, often hurt less than ghosting. Closure, even bad closure, lets your mind file things away. But ambiguity keeps the file open forever. The trap is this. The less information you have, the more your brain fills in the blanks, and it fills them with your own stuff, your fears, your hopes, your unresolved wounds. So you're not really thinking about them anymore. You're thinking about the story you invented around them. The real person faded long ago, but the puzzle remains vivid and real. If someone's living rent-free in your head, ask yourself what question about them you're still trying to answer. Often, the way out is giving yourself the closure they won't provide. Uncertainty sustains attentional priority. A text comes back 3 hours later, and the tone could mean anything. They liked your post at 2 a.m, but haven't messaged since. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're losing interest, maybe you said something wrong 3 weeks ago without knowing it. Your brain won't stop running the calculations because it hates open loops. It treats unresolved situations like unsaved files demanding attention before you can move on. The human mind is wired to settle ambiguity. When something about a person is solid and clear, your focus can finally rest. But when it's murky, your attention keeps circling back, trying to solve the puzzle piece by piece. It's exactly why ghosting sticks harder than rejection ever will. A clean no is sad, but it's knowable. Your mind can file it away and move forward. A maybe, a silence, mixed signals, a contradiction tucked into warmth. That's quicksand. You replay conversations hunting for missed clues. You wonder if the vagueness means something, if inconsistency is secretly a sign. Each unanswered question pulls you into another loop. The cruelest version happens when someone keeps you suspended, just uncertain enough. Warm one day, cool the next, enough ambiguity to ensure you keep wondering. That inconsistency becomes a hook because your brain genuinely prefers spinning in confusion to accepting a clear, peaceful answer, even when clarity would hurt less. The trap is that your mind treats the unknown person as infinitely interesting precisely because nothing is settled. Breaking free means something harder than just waiting. Sometimes you have to give yourself the answer they won't and close the file on your own. Attribution ambiguity fuels rumination. They said something strange last Tuesday, and now you're 3 days deep in the loop. Was it a joke? A dig? A test? Here's what your brain is actually doing. When someone's behavior doesn't have an obvious explanation, your mind refuses to let it go. It starts fishing, reinterpreting, building new theories. That ambiguity is sticky in a way clarity never is. If they'd been openly mean, you'd file it away. If they'd been warm, you'd move on. But the middle ground, the unclear intention, the mixed signal, the comment that could mean anything, that's the slot machine of rumination. You keep pulling the lever because you might hit on the right interpretation next time. What makes this worse is that you're not just thinking about what they said, you're thinking about what it means about them, about you, about whether they like you or resent you or forgot about you entirely. Each reinterpretation feels like progress until it loops back to the original question, and suddenly it's midnight and you've spent hours inside someone else's ambiguous skull. The cruel part is that they probably weren't being cryptic on purpose. They were just tired or distracted or said something awkward like everyone does. But because you can't pin down their actual intention, your brain treats the gap like an unsolved mystery. And unsolved mysteries are what keep us awake. If you catch yourself ruminating on something someone said, try naming the ambiguity directly. I don't actually know what they meant. Sometimes naming the not knowing is enough to let your brain finally rest. Cognitive dissonance after mixed signals. They texted you first, so they must care. Then they vanished for 3 days without a word. They laughed at your joke like you were the funniest person alive, then treated you polite and distant the next time you saw them. Your brain is now running 2 incompatible films at once, and it cannot rest until one of them feels true. This is cognitive dissonance, and it is the reason you keep replaying conversations looking for clues, checking your phone at midnight, unable to stop thinking about them. When someone sends you a warm text and a cold silence, you are not just confused, you are stuck in a loop. Your mind keeps working the puzzle because a puzzle is solvable and confusion feels unbearable. So you obsess, rewrite the timeline, hunt for the real version of who they are, hoping that if you understand them well enough, the contradictions will dissolve and you can finally rest. Here is what makes this especially sticky. The person who gives you the most mixed signals will often be the one you think about most intensely because clarity, even bad clarity, is easier on the brain than mystery. Someone who rejects you cleanly lets you grieve and move on. Someone who occasionally comes close, then pulls away, keeps you suspended in amber, your mind genuinely unable to settle until the contradiction resolves. You stay because the puzzle is still open. The only exit is accepting that maybe they are not a riddle to crack. Maybe they are just inconsistent, and that information alone is enough to stop the machine. Effort justification for pursued attention. You text someone after weeks of silence. They don't reply for hours, so you refresh, wonder, construct narratives about why they're busy. The harder you try to get their attention, the more you think about them. Not despite the rejection, but almost because of it. Your brain hates loose ends and wasted effort. If you've already spent emotional energy chasing someone, your mind naturally rationalizes that expenditure by inflating their importance. It's called effort justification. The logic is brutal. I wouldn't spend this much time on someone who doesn't matter, so they must matter. They must be special. This is why people spiral hardest over someone who barely acknowledges them. The indifference becomes proof of their value. Your brain literally cannot accept that you wasted effort on someone ordinary. It's a cognitive trap disguised as intuition. The person doesn't change. Your behavior changes everything. Every unanswered message, every one-word reply, every delayed response actually strengthens the mental loop because you're now invested in justifying why you care. You're not thinking about them because they're great. You're thinking about them because you need them to be great. Justification compounds. Each day you keep trying, the stakes feel higher in your mind. The moment you notice yourself over-explaining someone's coldness or over-investing in their crumbs, that's your signal to pull back. Not because they'll suddenly notice, but because your own mind is already working against you. Stop the effort before the justification locks in. Short-circuit it early. Sunk cost of emotional investment. 2 years in, hundreds of conversations. Every Thursday night you carved out of your own life. Your brain now faces a choice that feels impossible. Walk away and admit all that time evaporated, or keep the door cracked open and maybe, just maybe, it meant something. That second option feels safer, so you replay moments, rewrite them warmer than they actually were, downplay the red flags that should have been stop signs. Your mind is working overtime to justify the investment because the alternative, accepting that you poured emotional currency into someone who didn't match your effort, feels like a kind of death. This is the sunk cost trap, and it doesn't care about logic. The more you invested, the harder your brain fights to keep you tethered. You'll strategize at 2 a.m. about how to win them back, not because they're actually right for you, but because your nervous system is desperately trying to make the past add up. It's throwing good money after bad, except the currency is your attention, your hope, your nights, your mornings spent wondering. But here's what matters. Those 2 years are already gone. They're in the past, locked away, and no amount of future thinking about this person will recover them or make them retroactively worth it. The real question isn't how to protect what you've already given. It's whether this person is actually worth your next 2 years, untethered from what came before. Can you look at them fresh, or are you just trying to make yesterday's choice pay for itself through tonight's obsession? That's where your freedom lives. Investment model of commitment. You've ever stayed in something long past the expiration date, a job, a friendship, a relationship, because you'd already put so much into it. Not because you loved it anymore, but because walking away meant admitting all that time and energy were for nothing. That's the investment model in motion, and it explains why someone might be unable to stop thinking about you even when the relationship has rotted. The more someone has poured into you, their time, their vulnerability, their plans, their identity as someone who loves you, the harder it is for them to let go, regardless of how you treat them now. It's not really about you anymore. It's about protecting the story they've built around you. Their brain treats you like a sunk cost. Leaving means facing the grief of wasted resources, so instead, they ruminate, they text at 2 a.m., they construct elaborate scenarios where things could still work. They're not obsessing over who you actually are, they're obsessing over the investment itself, the part of themselves they've already spent. This is especially potent if they've sacrificed something visible for the relationship, moved cities, ended other friendships, built their daily routine around you. The bigger the cost, the more their mind will circle back, trying to convince themselves it wasn't wasteful. Here's what cuts deepest. Recognizing this pattern in your own life means watching for the moment when you're staying somewhere, not because it serves you, but because the sunk cost has grown so loud it drowns out everything else. That's when the thinking spirals become chains, and the only way out is admitting the loss and walking anyway. Costly signaling of attention. Think about someone who texts you at 2 a.m. or shows up unannounced at your favorite coffee shop or remembers something small you mentioned months ago. There's a reason that sticks in your brain like a song you can't shake. They are paying you a cost. Not money necessarily, but time they could spend elsewhere, sleep they could be getting, risk of rejection they're taking on just to be near you or think about you. Your mind registers that. Evolution wired us to notice when someone burns resources on us because it means something. It means we matter enough to bump up their priority list, and that's a drug we're all hooked on in ways we don't fully admit. The reverse works too. If you think about someone constantly, your brain starts building this narrative that they must be worth it, that the mental real estate they're taking up must be justified. You're not just remembering them randomly, you're essentially saying to yourself, I keep choosing to think about this person instead of literally anything else I could be doing. That choice, repeated enough times, becomes evidence to your own mind that they're important. They're costly to think about. Every moment you spend replaying conversations or wondering what they're doing is a moment you're not doing something easier or more productive. So your brain double checks, why would I keep paying this price? The answer it lands on is usually because they matter. And once your mind settles into that story, walking away gets surprisingly hard. The attention itself becomes the proof of importance. Scarcity, heuristic of limited access. Remember the exact moment they pulled back. The texts that used to arrive daily suddenly showing up once a week, the responses getting shorter, the gaps between messages stretching like taffy. Did your mind do the opposite of what logic would predict? Instead of thinking less about them, you thought more. You replayed old conversations. You checked their socials. You found reasons to send them memes. Your brain wasn't being foolish. It was running an ancient program that treats scarcity like a fire alarm. When access to something decreases, your nervous system doesn't conclude it's less valuable. It concludes it's more precious. And now you have to solve for why this resource slipped away. If someone goes from texting daily to texting weekly, that drop in frequency doesn't diminish their hold on you. It tightens it because your cognitive machinery reads less available as more important. Intermittent contact is biochemically more addictive than consistent contact, which is why gamblers pull one-armed bandits and why you spiral over mixed signals. Your brain doesn't care whether this person actually deserves the mental real estate you're giving them. A scarcity signal is a scarcity signal, whether they're genuinely swamped, pulling away intentionally, or living their own life entirely. The inconsistency itself becomes the hook. When you catch yourself obsessing or analyzing old conversations, try pausing long enough to ask, am I thinking about this person more because they genuinely matter to me or because they're harder to reach? That single question, ruthlessly honest, can crack the spell just enough to give your mind back to yourself. Reactance against perceived withdrawal. You pull back slightly, a day late replying, a bit cooler in the text, and suddenly they're checking their phone more, reaching out, trying to pull you back in. They might not even know why. Their brain just registered a loss of control, and it's screaming for it back. That's reactance, and it's primal. When we sense someone pulling away, something in us doesn't accept the shrinking of choices. We want to matter again. We want to prove we still do, so they obsess, not because they love you more, but because your withdrawal feels like a threat to their autonomy, like you're deciding the terms and they're scrambling to even the score. The tighter you grip distance, the harder they often chase, not out of devotion, but out of that raw need to have some say in what's happening between you. What makes this sneaky is that it feels like passion, it feels like longing, but much of it is just friction, the mind spinning on a problem it can't solve. They're not thinking about you because you're irreplaceable, they're thinking about you because having you slip away means they're not in control anymore. The moment you become fully available again, the obsessive thinking often cools fast. The wanting wasn't about you. It was about the power to have you or lose you. If you're on the receiving end of this chase, remember, reactants' minds eventually settle down, and when they do, you see the real picture underneath. If you're the one chasing, get quiet with yourself about why. Is it them, or is it the sting of being pushed away? Absence-induced idealization. You break up with someone, and for 2 weeks you're fine, honest, even a little relieved. Then they like a photo from months ago, and suddenly you're remembering only the good parts, the laugh, the way they looked at you, the inside jokes nobody else gets. It's like your brain hired a very selective editor who cuts out every fight, every disappointment, every moment they made you feel small. When someone is gone, your mind fills the vacuum with a highlight reel, and the farther away they are, the shinier each memory becomes. This is absence-induced idealization, and it's why you can't stop thinking about them. Not because they were perfect, but because your brain made them perfect. Distance doesn't just make the heart grow fonder, it makes the person you're missing seem like a version of themselves that never quite existed. They become the partner who would have listened, the one who would have tried, the ideal version suspended in your head like a museum piece. Your brain did this partly out of grief. Idealization softens loss, and partly out of nostalgia, which always lies a little. The cruel part is that this idealized version is now what you're actually thinking about, comparing new people against, maybe even secretly hoping will text you someday. The next time you find yourself spiraling about someone who's gone, try asking yourself a smaller question. Am I thinking about them, or am I thinking about the story I've constructed? That gap between the real person and the edited version, the one you're actually missing, that's where the pull lives, and that's where you get your answer. Anticipatory nostalgia of endings. You're sitting across from someone you know won't be around forever, not because they're leaving tomorrow, but because you can feel it in the way time works. A colleague moving cities in 6 months, a friend whose life is diverging from yours, someone you're dating, but something doesn't quite lock. Your brain does something strange in those moments. It starts grieving them before they're gone. You find yourself noticing small things, the exact way they laugh, how they order coffee, the specific curve of a joke they always make. You're not doing this consciously. Your mind has already filed them under will miss, and so it's trying to cement the memories while it still can. This is anticipatory nostalgia, and it's a powerful trap because it makes you think about them constantly, not because you're falling deeper, but because you're already saying goodbye. The cruel part is that this feeling often gets mistaken for love. You think the constant thinking means they matter more than they do. You reinterpret the ache as attachment when really it's your nervous system trying to prepare for an absence. This happens especially with people who feel temporary, the ones we sense won't stay, or where we know the shelf life is short. So you hold them closer in your mind, replay conversations, imagine future moments you'll look back on. And they occupy your thoughts rent-free, not because they're meant to be yours, but because you've already decided they won't be. The next time you can't stop thinking about someone, pause and ask, am I drawn to them or am I drawn to the story of losing them? Rosy retrospection of shared moments. Remember that conversation where you both laughed until your sides hurt? Your brain didn't just file that away, it rewrote it. The awkward pauses got erased. The moment someone checked their phone, gone. What your mind kept was the highlight reel, polished and glowing, and now that person is forever linked to that feeling rather than the messy reality of what actually happened. This is rosy retrospection, and it's why people can't stop replaying time with someone. Their brain has literally rewritten the script to be better than it was. The tricky part is that it works both directions. When someone thinks back to moments with you, they're not remembering you. They're remembering the edited version, the rough edges softened, the boring stretches cut out. The tiny laugh or small kindness suddenly feels significant because context fades but feeling stays. So you become the person attached to those best of moments in their mind. You're the soundtrack to their highlight reel. This is why distance can actually make it worse. With time comes forgetting, and with forgetting comes curation. The bad joke, gone. The moment they seemed distracted, lost. The small complaint that bubbled up and vanished, erased entirely. What remains is pure gold, and gold doesn't let you move on easily. You become the symbol of your best moment together, not the actual person they knew. And that gap between the real you and the remembered you, it only widens. They can't stop thinking about you because they're not really thinking about you. They're thinking about the ghost version their memory created, and ghosts are impossible to forget. Peak and rule of last impressions. Spend 3 hours together in comfortable, easy rhythm, mostly forgettable, and then in the last 5 minutes, something shifts. Maybe you laughed harder than you had all night. Maybe they said something vulnerable that caught you off guard. Maybe the goodbye lingered just long enough to feel different. Now that moment is what plays in their head when they think of you, not the middle hours that were perfectly fine but essentially neutral. Your brain doesn't record experiences fairly. It remembers the high point and the final moment, then stitches those two together into the story of what actually happened. Everything in between gets compressed or forgotten. So if someone keeps thinking about you, there's a good chance you either created an emotional spike, something that felt novel or intense or real, or you stuck a landing at the end that mattered, a conversation that deepened in the last few minutes, a compliment they didn't expect, a vulnerability you showed right before leaving. The cruel part is this works in reverse. A perfect evening can evaporate if the ending feels flat or rushed or performed. But here's what saves you. You can shape this, not manipulate, shape. Notice when conversations are drifting toward goodbye. Ask one real question instead of 5 surface ones. Let silences breathe. End on something that feels true. The peak doesn't have to be fireworks. It just has to break the pattern of ordinary. That's the moment they'll replay when you're gone, the one that keeps you alive in their thinking long after. Von Restorff, distinctiveness in memory. Your brain is basically a highlight reel filtered by contrast. Most people blur together. The coworker whose name you forgot, the person next to you on the train, but then someone stands out. Maybe they wore the exact shade of green that caught your eye, or said something nobody else would say, or disappeared right when you were starting to understand them. Your brain immediately tags them as different, and that tag is the von Restorff effect. It's ruthless in who it marks. What makes someone distinct is rarely that they are special in absolute terms. It's that they break the pattern of everything else around them. A kind gesture in a sea of indifference, a weird laugh, a sudden emotional honesty when everyone else plays it safe. Your nervous system registers the mismatch, and your memory locks onto it like a magnet. The brain assumes that what stands out must be important for survival. So, if you can't stop thinking about someone, there's a decent chance they did something that didn't fit the template. They said no when you expected yes. They left when you thought they'd stay. They showed you a version of themselves nobody else got to see. Your mind keeps returning to them, not because they are necessarily right for you, but because they are memorable. And memorability and obsession are dangerously close cousins. The trap is mistaking distinctiveness for destiny. Just because someone broke the mold doesn't mean they belong in your life, but catching yourself in this pattern, that might be enough to ask whether you're thinking about the person or just the contrast they created. Novelty, dopamine, and prediction error. Your brain is a prediction machine that runs on surprise, and someone gets stuck in your head the moment they break the pattern you built around them. They said something you didn't expect, or showed up different than last time, or did the exact opposite of what you thought they would do. That gap between what you predicted and what actually happened is where dopamine floods in, your brain's reward system lighting up to close the mismatch. The bigger the gap, the more your neural spotlight lands on them. This isn't romance or deep connection, it's pure mechanism. You are not obsessing because they are perfect or safe. You are obsessing because they are unpredictable. Maybe they oscillate between warmth and distance. Maybe they blindside you with kindness after letting you down. Maybe they keep changing their mind about what they want from you, forcing your brain to rebuild its model of who they are again and again. Each time you get it wrong, dopamine fires as your mind recalibrates. You are literally getting chemically rewarded for the confusion. A person who surprises you constantly is not necessarily good for you. They are just brilliant at hijacking your reward system. Your nervous system confuses novelty with connection, unpredictability with depth. And here is the quiet part. The moment they become predictable, the obsession often dissolves. You stop thinking about them not because you stopped loving them, but because your dopamine has nothing new to work with, no more prediction errors to chase. So ask yourself, are you drawn to them or drawn to the puzzle they represent? Mere exposure, familiarity, warmth. There's a reason the person who sits next to you in class starts to feel magnetic without saying much at all. Psychologists call it the mere exposure effect, and it's stupidly simple. The more you encounter someone, the more your brain defaults to liking them. Not because they did anything special, just because they showed up. Your brain treats repetition like evidence of safety. If they're still here, they must be okay. And if they're okay, they must be likable. It's not rational, it's evolutionary. Your ancestors didn't have time to overthink their neighbors. They just got comfortable with the faces that didn't hurt them. Now you're stuck with that same wiring, and it fires up every single time they cross your path. The warmth builds without your permission. A familiar voice becomes reassuring. A repeated text thread becomes proof they care. A habit of running into them becomes fate. The cruel part is how automatic it is. You could dislike someone's actual personality, but if they're consistently in your orbit, your nervous system will start to relax around them anyway. Comfort masquerades as connection, and the person doing the thinking, they assume it means something deeper, that there's chemistry, that you get them somehow, but mostly you're just the person who didn't disappear. You're the one they've seen enough times that their brain categorized you as safe. If someone can't stop thinking about you, ask yourself, have you simply been the consistent background music of their life? Sometimes the stickiest feelings aren't about who you are, they're about how often you showed up. Repeated proximity and passive contact. Your brain has a weakness for patterns, even ones that barely exist. You pass the same coffee shop every morning, and the barista's face settles into your mental background like a song you can't name. Not from conversation, but from seeing them there again and again. That repetition triggers what psychologists call the mere exposure effect. Your nervous system treats frequency like familiarity and familiarity like meaning. If someone keeps appearing in your orbit without you needing to speak to them, something shifts. You see them in the hallway. They like your post without commenting. You both go to the same gym. None of that requires an actual connection, but your brain logs every instance as a small thread in the larger tapestry of your days. And here's the hook. Your mind assumes patterns mean something. So later, when you think about them, it does not feel random. It feels like they have been thinking about you too. The real trap is how convincing passive contact becomes. Seeing someone regularly, even in the margins, builds a false sense of intimacy. You start imagining a relationship between you that lives only in the space between what you observe and what you want to believe. They might barely register your name, but you have already woven them into the fabric of your routine. If you catch yourself stuck on someone you barely know but keep running into, pause and ask, are you attached to them or to the pattern your brain created? That separation might be the only thing standing between thinking about them and actually moving on. Misattribution of arousal transfer. Your nervous system doesn't read labels well. A text lands while you're still wired from a hard conversation, and suddenly they feel magnetic. But that electricity, it was already there, borrowed from the fight or flight charge you haven't metabolized yet. Your body activated for one reason and your brain spotted them nearby. So it did the math. They must be the source. This is misattribution of arousal transfer, and it explains why people fixate on someone they meet during peak moments. A stressful deadline, a concert, a breakup, even a near-miss car ride. Fear, anger, excitement, caffeine jitters. Your nervous system bundles them all as arousal. It doesn't sort them into categories. If that person is in frame when the activation spikes, your attention glues to them. You genuinely feel more drawn, more interested, more alive. The intensity feels real because it is real. You're just reading the source wrong. Then the arousal naturally fades over hours or days, but by then, you've already built a whole story. You replay the moment, hunt for signs they felt it too, lean harder into the narrative because it moved you so visibly. The machinery under all this is simple enough that noticing it shifts things. The next time someone takes up all your thinking space, pause and ask what else your body was running on at that moment. Were you nervous, amped, lonely, exhausted, grieving? That context doesn't erase the feeling. Feelings are still real, even when mislabeled, but it does drain some of the magnetic pull once you see where the voltage actually came from. You can't unfeel what you felt, but you can stop mistaking the wire for the current. Excitation transfer after shared adrenaline. You've just survived something together. A car almost hit you both. You laughed until your ribs ached. You fought and made up. You went skydiving. Your heart is still hammering. Your skin is alive. Right then, when your nervous system is flooded with adrenaline and cortisol and dopamine all firing at once, you look at this person and feel this surge of intensity. You think you feel something. Maybe you do, but here's what's actually happening. Your body doesn't know the difference between fear adrenaline and attraction adrenaline. It all reads the same: pounding heart, dilated pupils, that electric, hyper-alert feeling. So when you're still wound up from the shared rush, your brain does something efficient but deceptive. It hooks that arousal onto the person standing next to you. They become the reason you feel alive, when really the adrenaline was doing the heavy lifting. This is why people bond intensely after crises, why couples who do extreme sports together often feel more in love, why that fight and makeup moment feels so transcendent. The arousal lingers for longer than you'd think, sometimes hours, and you're attributing every bit of it to them. The sticky part: this feeling fades fast. Once your nervous system calms down, that person might feel ordinary again. What felt like destiny in the moment was just physiology on loan. If you're chasing that feeling, you might keep seeking out drama with this person without realizing you're actually just chasing your own adrenaline high. Real connection doesn't need emergency lights spinning to prove it's real. Reciprocal liking feedback loop. You smile at someone and they smile back. Seems simple, right? But what you've actually triggered is a psychological loop that can spiral for days inside both your heads. When someone believes you like them, their brain literally starts manufacturing reasons to like you more. It's not calculated, it's automatic. Your attention feels like proof of your worth, and their reciprocal interest feels like proof of theirs. Now you're both feeding the loop. The more they think you're drawn to them, the more they look for evidence that confirms it. A casual text becomes a love letter in their mind. A laugh becomes a sign of deep connection. You do the same thing in reverse. Neither of you is lying. You're both just pattern matching, looking for signals that confirm what you already suspect. The real catch is that this loop can feel completely real even when it's built on almost nothing. A few conversations, a few shared looks, enough to make both people think they're constantly on the other's mind. And here's where it gets weird. It doesn't always require actual reciprocation to start spinning. Sometimes you project liking onto someone, they pick up on your energy and reflect it back, and suddenly you're both trapped in a hall of mirrors, each convinced the other is thinking about them way more than they actually are. The loop keeps spinning because stopping it requires someone to break the pattern first, and nobody wants to be the one who cares less. So it just keeps going. Pratfall charm of visible flaws. You've noticed it. The person who seems almost too perfect suddenly laughs too loud at their own joke, trips walking down the stairs, or admits they don't know how to cook an egg. Something shifts in you instantly. They feel real. Suddenly, they're not a threat or someone to measure yourself against. They're someone you can actually breathe around. This is the pratfall effect, and it's one of the quieter hooks that keeps people thinking about you long after a conversation ends. Perfection makes humans deeply nervous. It puts distance between you and them, makes you feel smaller by comparison or like they're performing rather than present. But the moment you reveal something awkward, messy, or genuinely amateur about yourself, you become relatable, you become human, and human beings are sticky in ways that polished versions of ourselves never quite manage to be. Here's the real trap: confusing honest flaws with manufactured ones. Nobody's fooled by strategic vulnerability or the "I'm so bad at math" line every attractive person uses. Real flaws are the small ones that leak out. The tremor in your voice when you care about something, the way you can't make eye contact when nervous, the fact that you're still figuring out basic things others mastered years ago. Those moments don't diminish you, they anchor you to something true. They make someone think, I want to know this person better. I want to see what happens when their guard actually comes down. That's exactly why people circle back. Not despite your flaws, but because your flaws proved you were worth paying attention to in the first place. Ben Franklin effect of asked favors. Ben Franklin noticed something weird about his rivals. After he asked them for small favors, they started liking him more, not less. The man he'd been feuding with suddenly felt warmer toward him. So he decided to test it. He asked a political opponent to lend him a rare book. The guy did, and just like that, the tension dissolved. Franklin realized that when someone does you a favor, their brain doesn't say, I'm nice. It says, I must like this person. Otherwise, why would I help them? Your mind fills in the story backward. Now flip it. If you've asked someone for help, advice, a recommendation, feedback, even borrowing a pen, they are more likely to think about you. Not because they resent the favor, but because their brain is working overtime to justify why they said yes. Every time they remember the ask, they're reminded of their own decision to help. That reinforces something softer than obligation, a tiny investment in you. They've already decided you're worth it once. The loop keeps you in their head. This is especially sticky when the favor is just big enough to matter, but small enough to feel doable. You're asking to review your draft, not to co-sign a loan. You're asking for an introduction, not their kidney. The sweet spot is where the favor feels like a choice. They could have said no, but they picked yes. And now their brain is quietly rewriting what that means about how they feel. If someone is thinking about you constantly, odds are decent you asked them for something once, and they're still making sense of it. Benign envy and aspirational modeling. Someone in your life seems to have what you want, and you can't stop replaying their moves in your head, not from bitterness, but from hunger. Maybe they're unshakable calm. Maybe they know how to walk into a room and belong. Maybe they've built the thing you're still sketching on a napkin. Your brain loops through conversations, studies their choices, imagines wearing their confidence like a coat. That's benign envy. And it's not a sickness, it's a growth compass. Unlike toxic envy, which poisons you, benign envy pulls you toward something real that exists in the world. It makes you curious instead of bitter. Your mind has cast them as a living blueprint, and every memory becomes a small simulation. What if I tried that? What if I responded like that? High performers do this routinely. They become temporarily obsessed with someone a few steps ahead, using that orbit to accelerate. The real trap isn't the thought loop itself. It's mistaking the loop for unhealthy fixation when it's actually your system trying to upgrade itself. Passive replay alone won't get you there, though. The move is to stop accidentally worshiping and start learning. Ask them questions. Watch what they actually do, not the hero version you've imagined. Turn that brain loop into real observation and conversation. That person who won't leave your mind might be exactly the mirror your growth needed, but only if you stop watching from the audience and start being curious about the craft instead. Halo effect from one salient trait. They made you laugh once, really laugh, the kind where your guard drops. And now your brain has decided they're probably good at everything else too. That laugh, that one bright moment, has cast a glow backward and forward across your entire memory of them. You find yourself replaying conversations, searching for hidden depth. You assume they're kind because they're witty. You believe they're trustworthy because they're attractive. One salient trait, something vivid or memorable, has become the lens through which you see their entire personality, and your mind keeps returning to them because it's still busy filling in the blanks with flattering details. The halo effect works like a light that doesn't just illuminate one thing. It washes everything nearby in the same warm color. It doesn't just make you think they're great. It makes you think they're consistently great across domains you've never actually seen. You notice how they take their coffee and think it says something profound about their character. You hear a story they told and reinterpret it through the glow, finding sensitivity where there might just be coincidence. The real trap is that this mental machinery runs in the background, so quiet you almost can't feel it working. You're not consciously deciding they're wonderful. You're unconsciously inferring it from a single glowing fact. And the more you think about them trying to prove your impression right, the stickier they become. The move forward isn't to kill the glow, but to get deliberately curious about what you're not seeing, the traits you haven't checked, the small moments that might complicate the picture, implicit egotism of name similarity. Your name isn't a label. It's wired into your sense of self so early and so deeply that your brain treats anything mirroring it like a piece of home. When someone shares your name, initials, or even just the first letter, your unconscious mind lights up with a recognition that feels almost magnetic, and you don't even know it's happening. You're not consciously thinking, oh, we're destined. Instead, you feel a warm, unexplained pull, the kind that makes you remember them easier, forgive them quicker, and unconsciously assume you have way more in common than you probably do. This is implicit egotism, and it runs so quietly you'd miss it entirely if you weren't looking for it. Researchers have tracked this effect, shaping who we date, who we hire, who we become friends with, all because of a name accident that happened before either of you were born. The name similarity acts like a psychological permission slip that makes liking them feel less like chasing and more like something was always meant to land there. There's a reason people named Sarah feel oddly drawn to other Sarahs, or Jasons notice Jasons across a crowded room. It's not magic or fate whispering in your ear. It's your neurology playing favorites with the familiar. So if you can't stop thinking about someone and you share a name, or they have your initials, or their name just sounds like yours, know that part of what's gripping you is your brain waving a flag at something that feels ancestrally safe. Now that you see it, watch how often it actually holds weight versus how often it's just your own echo. Self-expansion through new perspectives. Maybe they grew up somewhere else, read obsessively about a topic you dismissed, held a political view that made you actually reconsider, or moved through the world with a confidence you didn't know was possible. Your brain is now hooked on the feeling of expansion, that rush when a new framework clicks into place and suddenly the landscape looks bigger. Psychologists call this self-expansion, and it's a legitimate anchor. When someone expands your sense of what's possible or real, your mind keeps circling back to them because they've become a gateway to a version of yourself you didn't have access to before. It's not always romantic obsession. Sometimes it's intellectual hunger wearing a face. The tricky part is that you're often not thinking about them as much as you're thinking about who you become in their presence or through their ideas. They're the scaffolding your growing mind is still using. And here's what matters. This kind of pull can feel permanent, but it usually isn't. The magnetic charge starts to fade once you genuinely integrate what they taught you, once it becomes your perspective instead of their perspective living in your head. You stop needing them to remind you the world is wide. The person becomes less a person and more a bookmark in the story of who you're becoming. So if you're caught in this loop, the move isn't to fight it or chase them or try to freeze them in place. It's to keep moving forward with what they opened up in you. Let it settle into your bones and watch how the pull eventually transforms into something quieter. Gratitude. Michelangelo phenomenon of ideal self-mirroring. You know that feeling when someone sees you not as you are, but as who you could be, and suddenly you start becoming that person. Researchers call it the Michelangelo phenomenon, named after the sculptor who supposedly saw the angel trapped in the marble. Your person does the same thing with you. They catch glimpses of your potential so clearly that you begin sculpting yourself toward it. And here's what makes them stick in your brain. They're literally helping you become yourself. When someone holds up that mirror to your best version, your brain treats them as essential. Not just a crush or a friend, but a collaborator in your own becoming. The trap is that this works both ways, often invisibly. They might be projecting their ideal onto you while you're doing it back to them, two mirrors facing each other, each one half seeing, half imagining. You think about them constantly because they've become intertwined with your own self-image, which means losing them feels like losing a version of yourself that was starting to exist. This is why people stay attached to relationships that aren't always healthy. The other person was sculpting them into someone they desperately wanted to be. The stickiness doesn't come from who they are, it comes from who they helped you become. Pay attention to whether you're thinking about them because they genuinely see you or because they're showing you a version of yourself you're still chasing. The first is real connection. The second is self-love wearing another person's face. Sculpting effect of felt potential. You know that feeling when someone shows you a version of yourself you didn't know existed, not who you are right now, but who you could be if they stuck around. That's the sculpting effect. Your mind doesn't just remember who they are. It rewires itself around the person you might become if they loved you back. It's magnetic because it feels like possibility itself has a heartbeat. Here's what actually happens. Your brain treats them like a mirror that shows a better angle. They laugh at your jokes in a way that makes you funnier in your own head. They listen like your thoughts matter, so suddenly your thoughts feel sharper. They see ambition in you before you've earned it, and your nervous system literally reorganizes around that belief. You're not thinking about them constantly because they're perfect. You're thinking about them because they've become the sculptor of who you want to be. The trap is that you're not missing them. You're missing the version of you that existed only when they looked at you. And here's the hard part. That sculpted self was never real. It was a projection, a possibility, a maybe self that felt so alive precisely because it wasn't built on the ground yet. When they leave, it doesn't just hurt because they're gone. it hurts because the aspirational you collapses too, and you're left holding a chisel with no hands to guide it. If someone keeps circling your thoughts this way, ask yourself, what version of me am I missing? Then ask, can I become that without their mirror? Self-verification of a seen identity. There's someone in your life who makes you feel like yourself in a way nobody else does. And suddenly, you can't stop thinking about them. Not because they're chasing you, but because they're the only mirror that shows you back the version of you that feels true. Around them, you don't have to translate or perform. Your jokes land the way you meant them. Your weirdness isn't a liability. Your ambitious thoughts don't get minimized. They've seen the real thing and they didn't run. Your brain is actually searching for what psychologists call self-verification, evidence that the way you see yourself is real and solid. When someone confirms your identity back to you, especially the parts you're unsure about, your mind treats that like oxygen. You return to it obsessively because you're not thinking about them. You're thinking about the you that exists in their presence, the one that finally gets to breathe. Here's where it gets tangled. This gets confused with love or destiny. It's not. It's recognition, and recognition is intoxicating because it feels so rare, even when it shouldn't be. If someone makes you feel seen, you'll think about them constantly, replaying conversations where they got you, analyzing moments where they proved they understand. You're not chasing them, you're chasing the confirmation that you exist as you believe you do, that the real version of you is worth someone's attention. The next time you can't stop thinking about someone, pause and ask, am I drawn to them or am I drawn to how they mirror me back? The answer changes everything about what happens next. Mirroring and behavioral synchrony. You sit across from someone and notice your leg bounces exactly like theirs does. You laugh, they laugh, you lean in, they lean in. None of it is conscious. It's like your body decided to become a copy machine the moment they walked into the room. This is mirroring, and it works both ways. When someone mirrors you, your brain registers, we are alike, and alike feels like home. But here's where it gets sticky. If someone has been mirroring you deeply, matching your speech patterns, your humor timing, the shape of your pauses, you start to feel seen by them in a way that's almost magnetic. Your nervous system literally synced with theirs. Every interaction carved a groove. And when that person disappears or pulls back, your body doesn't just miss them, it misses the rhythm. You think about them because your physiology is still looking for that matched heartbeat, that synchronized breath. It's why you can't shake someone even when the relationship made no logical sense. The behavioral synchrony created a neuromuscular memory, and memories don't care about reason. They only know repetition and comfort. Your body learned them like a song. The person becomes less of a choice and more of a pattern your nervous system is trying to complete. It's not nostalgia or romance operating here. It's your autonomic system calling out for a familiar frequency. If you find yourself haunted by someone, sit with this. Did they mirror me so completely that my body is still expecting them? Because that synchrony, once established, isn't optional. It's written into your physiology now. Interactional attunement in conversation. You know that feeling when someone mirrors your energy back to you. They lean in when you lean in. They slow down when you get quiet. They laugh at the same jokes in the same way. It doesn't feel like they're trying. It feels like they get you. That's interactional attunement, and it's a neurological hook your brain wasn't built to resist. When someone matches your rhythm and speech patterns, your nervous system literally calms down around them. They become predictable in the best way, and predictability breeds comfort, and comfort breeds obsession. The person you keep thinking about probably did this without knowing it. They matched your cadence, mirrored your hand gestures, or picked up on the exact moment you shifted from joking to serious. Your brain registered them as safe, synchronized, compatible. So even when they're not around, your mind keeps playing those conversations on repeat, chasing that rare feeling of being truly met. Here's the trap. Interactional attunement can happen by accident or by design. Some people are naturally gifted at it, others learn it, study it, weaponize it. Either way, your brain treats it the same, as a signal that you've found someone rare. The sticky part is that once your nervous system associates someone with that deep resonance feeling, it starts hunting for them. A song they mentioned, a joke they'd find funny, a silence that feels like theirs. You're not obsessing because they're special. You're obsessing because they made your own energy feel reflected back to you. And that's a sensation most of us chase for years. Vulnerability, disclosure, escalation. You tell someone a small secret, maybe something you're embarrassed about, a fear, a failure, and they listen without flinching. So next time, you go deeper. You tell them something that actually matters, something you've never said out loud before. They hold it carefully. Now you're stuck. Your brain has literally wired you to keep thinking about this person because they hold pieces of you that no one else does. Each confession raises the stakes. You're not just sharing information. You're testing whether they'll abandon you when they see the real version. And if they don't, if they stay gentle and close, your mind keeps circling back, replaying the moment you were that exposed and survived it. They become the container for a version of yourself you had to hide everywhere else. Here's what makes it tricky. Sometimes this person wasn't special at all. They just happened to be there when you were ready to crack open. They were the first safe landing pad, not necessarily the right one. But your nervous system doesn't distinguish between timing and destiny. It knows they've seen you vulnerable and accepted you anyway. And that creates a bond that feels deeper than it actually is. The paradox is that vulnerability is how we genuinely connect. But when it all funnels through one person, you've built a shrine instead of a relationship. The move isn't to stop being vulnerable, it's to notice when you're using one person as the only mirror you trust, and then slowly, carefully practice being seen by others too. Spread the weight across more hands. That's how you build real belonging instead of dependency. Fast friends reciprocal question spiral. You ask them about their worst job and they light up, tell you 3 stories, then turn it around. What about you? You answer. They nod. Lean in. Ask a follow-up nobody usually asks. Before either of you realizes it, 2 hours have vanished and you've swapped things you've never told anyone. This isn't accident. It's a psychological engine running at full speed, and the person on the other side becomes memorable in a way strangers almost never are. The magic lives in reciprocal vulnerability. When someone asks you a real question and actually listens, your brain translates that as, "This person sees me." Then, when you return the question with genuine curiosity, they feel the same. You're not just exchanging words, you're exchanging attention. Each question is a tiny act of choosing them. Our brains don't forget people who make us feel chosen. The hard part is that this spiral hijacks your thoughts, especially early on. You replay conversations, wonder what they're doing, construct new things you want to tell them. You're not obsessed with the person. You're addicted to the feeling of being known. They loop through your mind because the last interaction was textured, specific, and reciprocal in a way most of your days aren't. They asked about your fear of failure. You asked about theirs. That specificity sticks. So if someone can't stop thinking about you, odds are you've both fallen into that spiral together. You've asked real questions. You've listened. You've made them feel like the most interesting person in the room. Now your brain won't let you forget the person who did that back. Illusion of unique understanding. You say something small, a joke about how you hate waiting in lines, a confession that you cry at dog food commercials, and they light up. Nobody gets that about me, they say. You really see me. And suddenly you've become the person who understands them in a way nobody else does. Here's what's actually happening. They're not thinking about you because you're uniquely insightful. They're thinking about you because you're the first person who simply listened without judgment. And their brain has now glued that moment to your identity. It's not that you cracked some secret code about who they are. It's that most people talk at each other, and you happened to talk with them. That gap between being ignored and being heard feels so vast that it tricks them into believing you share some mystical connection. The really sticky part is this. They're now using you as a mirror for the version of themselves they wish people would see. Every time they think about you, they're actually thinking about how good they felt being accepted. But they've fused that feeling with you, not with the simple act of being listened to. So you become essential in their mind, the only person who truly understands. It's less about your actual insight and more about the rarity of their own experience of being met without defense. If someone else had been patient that day, they'd be thinking about them instead. That doesn't make the bond fake, but it does make it fragile. They're not attached to you. They're attached to how you made them feel about themselves. Stay aware of that difference. Shared secret coalition bonding. They now carry a piece of your story that no one else knows, a fear, a mistake, something you've never said out loud before. The moment that confession left your mouth, their brain rewired. You weren't just another person anymore. You became part of an exclusive two-person team, and that's the bond that hooks people almost regardless of actual compatibility. Researchers call it a coalition, a shared mission to protect something vulnerable, and your person now has something to guard about you. That protectiveness feels like closeness, even after just a few hours. They replay the moment you trusted them. They imagine being there when you needed it. They wonder if you think about them the same way, if they're the only one you've told. Harriet Lerner's research showed that when someone shares something they've never told anyone, we unconsciously become loyal to them, not because of who they are, but because we're now custodians of their trust, guardians of a secret that matters. That creates a shadow bond pulling them back, even when logic says they should walk away. But here's where it gets tricky. This works both directions. Someone can absolutely use it to keep you tethered by drip feeding you insider information, shared jokes about other people, confidences that make you feel chosen and special. The stickiest bonds are often built on us versus them logic rather than genuine affection, which means you might be addicted to the feeling of being in their circle, not to them at all. Insider language and private jokes. There's a phrase only you two use, something ridiculous that started 3 weeks ago in a parking lot, or a way of saying hello that makes zero sense to anyone else. When they hear that exact phrase now, you're the only person it triggers. That's not random. When someone coins language with you, speaks it with you, laughs at the inside reference only you understand, They're literally building a neural pathway that leads back to you. Your brain likes efficiency. It likes shortcuts. Inside jokes are cognitive shortcuts that bypass logic and go straight to feeling. The word becomes you. The reference becomes you. And every time they encounter that language in their day, even in their own head, the neural activation fires your face into their mind. It's almost involuntary. What makes this sticky is that it also signals belonging. Insider language says you are close enough, trusted enough, funny enough to exist in this private world together. Most humans think about people who make them feel like they belong to something special. They replay the moment that joke landed. They anticipate the next time they'll use it together. They find themselves in mundane situations, grocery store, shower, commute, and suddenly that phrase pops into their mind, and so do you. The loop tightens. The more private the language, the more exclusive it feels, the harder it is to shake. Here's the real trap. You don't have to do anything for it to work. The phrase does the work for you. If you want to live in someone's head rent-free, give them words only the two of you speak. Nickname encoded intimacy cue. A nickname only they use lands in your ear, and suddenly it's playing on repeat in your head like a song you didn't download. What's actually happening is that a nickname is private language, a signal that you've crossed from stranger into a tier where formal distance evaporates. When someone invents a name for you, they're encoding you into their inner world, creating a micro-ceremony that says you matter enough for a special name. Your brain registers this immediately, and you think about them partly because they've handed you a verbal wristband, proof of belonging. The stranger part is that nicknames work in reverse too. If you're obsessing over them, you might catch yourself using a nickname for them without deciding to. It's your mind's way of making the relationship real through language, deepening it one syllable at a time. This is why a simple name shift can hit harder than a confession. It's not the words themselves, it's the psychological claim embedded in the act of naming. You've both crossed from person I know into person who lives in my inner speech, and there's no uncrossing that line easily. What locks it in place is that nicknames bypass conscious choice entirely. You didn't decide to feel closer when they said your funny name. Your nervous system just registered the intimacy signal and your brain coded it as significant. The next time someone creates a name that sticks, notice that small jolt of connection ripple through you. That feeling of being known in such a specific way, recognized through a sound no one else uses, is exactly why they rent so much space in your mind and stay there. In-group belonging signals. You know that feeling when someone laughs at the exact joke only you would find funny, or they remember the small thing you mentioned weeks ago, the weird coffee order, the band nobody else listens to anymore, the specific way you describe your anxiety. Your brain lights up, not because they're perfect, but because they're looking at you, the real weird edges of you, and they're not turning away. We are desperately wired to belong, not to a crowd, but to a specific group that gets us, that speaks our language, that validates the parts of ourselves we thought were too strange. When someone offers you that sense of insider status, your brain treats it like a signal that you're safe, that you're home. They chose to see you. They chose to remember. They chose to understand. Suddenly, they're the person your mind keeps returning to, whether you're actively thinking about them or not. Here's where it gets dangerous. This works even when the relationship isn't healthy. A manipulative person can manufacture in-group signals, special nicknames, inside jokes. We're so different from everyone else, and your belonging instinct will override your good sense. Your brain will cling to them because losing that sense of being known feels like exile. That's why you can't stop thinking about someone who hurt you. It's not that they're special, it's that they made you feel chosen, and your nervous system is still trying to keep that membership alive. When someone makes you feel unusually seen, pause and ask yourself, does that seeing come with actual respect or just the feeling of intimacy without the substance underneath? Fundamental attribution to essence. 3 weeks, one unkind comment, and somehow you've built an entire character profile around it. They're cold, they're thoughtless, they're someone who hurts people, and now they're impossible to stop thinking about. What happened is you fused a single moment into their essence, made it permanent, made it them. Your brain took a snapshot and called it the full album. One sharp comment becomes proof of cruelty. One cancellation becomes proof of selfishness. One rejection becomes proof they never valued you. Meanwhile, if you'd said the same thing, you'd have a dozen explanations ready. Tired, stressed, misunderstood, having a bad day. But with them, the door closes. Their action feels like evidence of their soul. And if their soul is the problem, your mind keeps circling like it's detective work, trying to solve the mystery. How could someone you liked do that? The answer your brain lands on feels clean. They were never really who you thought. Here's where it gets sticky. The unflattering interpretation sticks harder than the charitable one because it actually quiets your anxiety. It explains the hurt. It justifies the obsession. Thinking about them becomes necessary, a way to protect yourself from being fooled again. But here's the truth almost no one tells you. Most people are doing their best with incomplete information and exhaustion. That sharp comment might have been the only language available to them in that moment. The real shift happens when you hold both truths at once. They said something hurtful, and they're still probably more complex than that single moment suggests. Your brain will resist this both and thinking because it feels less safe. Try it anyway. That resistance itself is what keeps you circling. Rumination as failed problem solving. You replay the conversation 17 times in your head, each time finding a new angle, a sharper thing you should have said, a way the other person's words maybe didn't mean what you thought. Your mind feels productive, like you're solving something, but here's what's actually happening. You're stuck in a loop that never reaches a door. Rumination isn't thinking, it's thinking that ate its own tail. It starts as a real problem. Something hurt, something confused you, and your brain decides it can find the exit by replaying the scene. Except there is no exit in a memory. Each loop tightens the grip of that person on your thoughts, not because they matter more, but because your mind has glued itself to the unsolvable puzzle of them. The trap is that rumination mimics actual problem solving so well. It has the intensity, it has the focus, it feels like you're getting somewhere. But if the problem actually could be solved by thinking about it more, you would have solved it by hour 2. By hour 20, you're not solving anymore. You're rehearsing pain as if rehearsal could rewrite it. The person you can't stop thinking about becomes the symbol of your unsolved problem. So you think about them to think about it. And nothing changes except your certainty that you're broken for not being able to let it go. The real move is noticing when your thinking stopped asking questions and started performing them instead. When your mind switched from trying to solve to trying to survive the memory. Thought suppression rebound. You wake up determined. Today, you will not think about them. That's it. Done. You've made the deal with yourself. But by noon, you're lying in bed replaying a conversation from 3 months ago, analyzing their tone, wondering if they meant something different. By evening, you're checking their profile again. What just happened? You tried the opposite of obsession and got trapped in a tighter loop, and there's actual science behind why that backfired so completely. When you tell your brain not to think about something, you've essentially drawn a giant red circle around it. Your mind has to know what you're trying to avoid, so it keeps checking. Are you thinking about them yet? Am I doing it right? The harder you push the thought away, the more your brain keeps it close, monitoring it like a security camera. This is the ironic rebound effect. Suppression doesn't erase desire, it amplifies the preoccupation. It's like telling someone not to think of a white elephant. The elephant is now all they can see, and because you're fighting so hard against the thought, each time it surfaces, it feels even more urgent and magnetic. The real escape isn't resistance, it's permission. Let the thought arrive, acknowledge it without judgment or action. Don't push it, don't grab it. When you stop fighting, your brain stops defending. The thought loses its teeth because it's no longer forbidden fruit. It's just a thought drifting through, the way clouds pass through sky. That shift from I can't think about them to I notice I'm thinking about them is where the spell actually breaks. Ironic monitoring of forbidden thoughts. You tell yourself not to think about them. Seems reasonable, right? But the moment you give your brain that instruction, something strange happens. Their face pops up more vividly than before. Their name echoes louder, and suddenly you're hyper-aware of every suppressed thought. This is ironic monitoring, and it's less about willpower and more about how your brain is wired to actually do the opposite of what you forbid it. When you say, don't think about X, your mind has to hold X in memory just to know what not to think about, which keeps them alive and front and center. The more you white-knuckle the attempt to stop, the more intrusive the thought becomes, like trying to ignore an itch that only gets worse the more you think about not scratching it. What makes this especially sticky in relationships is that forbidden thoughts carry emotional weight. There's guilt, shame, longing, or confusion wrapped around them, which actually amplifies the irony effect. Your brain treats them like a threat to stay vigilant about, so it keeps rechecking and rechecking. The counter move here isn't more suppression, it's permission. The moment you stop fighting the thought and instead observe it without judgment, oh, there's that memory again, interesting, your brain stops treating it like an alarm bell. Acceptance paradoxically kills the thought's grip faster than force ever could. You're not becoming obsessed because you want to. You're obsessed because you've accidentally weaponized your own mind against yourself. Sometimes the way out is to lower your defenses, not raise them higher. That shift from fighting to watching changes everything. Intrusive thought, habituation, failure. You know that thought that shows up uninvited, someone's face, a conversation, a text you didn't send, and no matter how hard you ignore it, it gets louder? That's your brain doing the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do. Habituation is supposed to be automatic. Your mind is wired to tune out the background hum of life. You stop noticing the hum of the fridge. You stop flinching at a sound you hear every day. The volume dial should turn down on its own, but sometimes it cranks up instead. When someone matters, whether they hurt you, rejected you, or fascinated you, your brain treats the thought like a threat, not background noise. Every time you notice the thought and react to it, cringe, yearn, replay, analyze, you're reinforcing it. You're essentially telling your nervous system, pay attention, this is important. So the thought sticks harder. The loop becomes tighter. What makes it worse is that fighting it directly often backfires. Push away the thought and it rebounds stronger because the very act of suppression is a form of attention. It's like trying not to think of a blue elephant. The elephant gets bigger. People stuck on someone often describe it as a broken record that won't skip forward. That's habituation failure in action. The thought has been marked as too significant for your brain to let go of. The escape route, paradoxically, isn't to try harder to forget or ignore. It's to let the thought exist without reacting to it, without the emotional fuel that keeps it alive. Boring it to death slowly, without judgment, is how the record finally stops playing. Default mode network wandering. Your brain has a daydream engine that never really shuts down. When you're not locked onto something urgent, washing dishes, driving a familiar route, scrolling without purpose, a sprawling network of neurons called the default mode network wakes up and starts its quiet work. It doesn't wander randomly. It gravitates toward social puzzles, unresolved moments, and people who carry weight in your life. So if someone has become significant, your idle brain naturally loops back to them at a red light or while half asleep, remembering something they said. Not because you're obsessed, because your mind defaults to the relationships that matter when nothing else demands its attention. The stickiness compounds when uncertainty lives in the gap. An ambiguous text, a confusing conversation, something left unsaid, these become your brain's favorite puzzle to chew on. Your mind wants closure, wants to solve it. So it revisits the person and the moment over and over, hoping each replay will crack the code. You're not necessarily yearning. Your mind wandering into a social puzzle that feels unfinished. Here's the quiet shift. Your default mode network doesn't distinguish between genuine longing and genuine confusion. Both feel the same because they both activate the same seeking machinery. The person you can't stop thinking about might just be the last open loop your brain hasn't solved yet. Name what's actually happening. If you can offer yourself even small closure, a real conversation, a clear boundary, or simply the conscious choice to let it rest, your default mode will eventually find a new puzzle to solve and drift away. Spontaneous retrieval by ambient cues. You walk into a coffee shop and suddenly they're in your head, not because you were thinking about them, because the barista made that exact same joke. Or the light hit the counter the way it did that morning last spring. Your brain didn't ask for permission to pull them back in. It just did automatically because some sensory thread in the room matched something stored in the memory that still has their name attached to it. This is how ambient cues hijack your attention, not through a logic or intention, but through the body's back door, a song, a smell, the way someone laughed across the room, a texture, the color of a jacket. Any of these tiny environmental triggers can yank that person from storage into your conscious mind in a millisecond, even if you've been doing fine for weeks. What makes this so sticky is that it feels involuntary, and it is. Your brain is doing pattern matching below the radar, hunting for matches between the present moment and things you've encoded as important. And if someone was emotionally intense or tied to a specific place or season, they become wired into the sensory landscape. You'll keep bumping into them invisibly. The wrinkle is that each retrieval strengthens the association, making future triggers even more likely to work. It's not that you can't stop thinking about them, it's that your environment is on their team. The move, if you need one, stay aware of your own patterns. Notice which moments or places reliably pull them in. Sometimes just naming it breaks the automatic spell. Context-dependent memory triggers. A song comes on during your commute, and suddenly they're there, not a thought you chose, but a full sensory flood. The coffee shop smell, the laugh from a stranger, the particular slant of afternoon light through a window, and your whole nervous system is back in that moment with them. You're not obsessing, you're experiencing how your brain actually files memories. Unlike a computer database where files sit neutral and untouched, your mind glues each memory to its context. The specific place, the smell in the air, the feeling in your chest, the person across from you. When you encounter that context again, your brain doesn't retrieve just a fact. It unlocks the entire bundle all at once. Coffee shop means them. That song means them. That laugh means them. This is why you can go an entire day thinking about literally anything else, then turn a corner and feel like you're drowning. The brutal part is that every time that trigger fires, it gets stronger. Each remembering rewires the connection a little deeper, making your brain faster and more automatic at reaching for them the next time. You're accidentally training yourself to associate that place with them more intensely with every walk past it. The hard truth is that your environment becomes a library of them without you trying. So here's the real move. If you're caught in this loop, shift the context, take a different route, switch up your coffee spot, change the playlist rotation. You're not erasing them from memory, impossible anyway, but you're breaking the automatic door your brain keeps opening. Alter the trigger and you change what memory delivers to you without asking. State-dependent recall of mood. Tuesday night, you're scrolling through old messages in a low mood and they surface in your thoughts. Not because they texted, but because your brain just opened the file where you keep them. Your emotional state is acting as a retrieval key. Memories aren't stored by date or order. They're filed by the emotional temperature you were in when they formed. Sadness attracts sadness. Longing finds longing. So when you're already lonely, your mind doesn't reach for the time they canceled plans. It reaches for the memory that matches right now, the late night conversation, the way they looked at you, how seen you felt. None of that is false, but it's not the whole picture either. The trap deepens with repetition. The more you think about them while in a tender state, the stronger that mood-dependent link becomes. You're training your brain to pull them up every time you hit that same emotional note. If they made you feel that way often, if that was your rhythm together, the recall becomes automatic. The door opens before you notice you've stepped through it. What interrupts the pattern is a small pause. Check your emotional temperature when they cross your mind. Are you remembering them or remembering the feeling they gave you and your current mood just handed you the key? That one distinction, held for even a breath, can stop the thinking from spiraling. It's not about forcing them out. It's about seeing which files your sadness is actually opening. Olfactory memory encoding of scent. There's a reason you can walk into a coffee shop and suddenly be back in your grandmother's kitchen from 30 years ago, and the person you can't stop thinking about is woven right into that same neural pathway. Your nose doesn't just smell things, it short-circuits straight to your limbic system, the ancient part of your brain that handles emotion and memory, completely bypassing the logical prefrontal cortex. That means scent memories are less like photographs and more like emotional time machines, hitting harder than anything you see or hear. If this person wore a particular cologne, perfume, or even had a distinct smell, their laundry detergent, the way they smelled after a gym session, that soap they used, your brain encoded it as part of who they are. Now, whenever you catch that scent, even accidentally, it doesn't just remind you of them, it recreates the feeling of being around them. You're not thinking about them because you chose to. Your brain gets hijacked by a sensory trigger that skips all the usual reasoning steps. The cruelest part is how sneaky it operates. You might not even consciously notice the smell. Someone walks past you on the street wearing something similar, and suddenly you're drowning in memories you didn't ask to revisit. The scent pathway is so direct and so tangled with emotion that it can keep someone alive in your mind long after everything else has faded. If you're trying to move on, sometimes the most honest first step is admitting that a bottle of shampoo or the smell of rain has more power over your thoughts than you'd like. Music-linked episodic tagging. Walk into a coffee shop and a song hits. Suddenly, you're not just remembering them. You're there. Their laugh is audible. The light is exactly right. Their hand is where it was. Your brain didn't file that person away in isolation. It bundled them directly to the audio, packaging their face, their scent, what they said, the temperature of the room into a single neural file attached to a melody. Music reaches into emotional and sensory regions of your brain almost simultaneously, which is why a song acts like a time machine in a way that, say, a photograph doesn't. You might forget their exact words, but the feeling of hearing that song with them survives perfectly intact. Here's where the hook deepens. The more emotionally charged the moment was when the music played, the stronger the tag becomes. A first kiss during a song, a fight, a confession, your brain marked it as important and soldered it to the audio like a permanent label. So if you and this person have a shared song, or if you heard music during something that mattered, every replay doesn't just remind you of them, it recreates the episode in real time. Your nervous system gets the full signal again, the weight and the ache. The shift happens when you stop fighting it and instead purposefully listen to that song in new contexts, driving alone, at the gym, over breakfast with someone else. You're not trying to forget them. You're layering new memories on top of the old tagging, letting your brain slowly reassign the song to fresher moments. The song stays, they get lighter, conditioned place preference. Walk into the coffee shop where you first met them, and your chest tightens before your mind even catches up. Your nervous system learned to pair that place with their presence. And now, the geography itself is the trigger. Your brain is a map maker that labels locations with feelings, not facts. The amygdala, your body's alarm center, fires up automatically when you enter that space. It's not rational, it's wired. Scientists have watched this in rats too. A rodent will linger in a cage where it once found comfort even after the reward vanishes. Your brain follows the same blueprint. You're not choosing to think about them when you walk past that restaurant. Your body is responding to a learned association that feels as real as gravity. Here's where it gets sticky. Every time you visit and think of them, you reinforce the pathway. The neural groove deepens. Each return trip reactivates the memory, the longing, the loop. But the place itself has no actual power, only the power you keep feeding it by revisiting the story. The trap isn't that you can't change this. The trap is believing you need to exile yourself from these spaces forever. That's exhausting and unsustainable. Instead, deliberately create new associations in those locations. Sit at a different table. Visit with someone else. Order something new. Bring a friend who makes you laugh until your ribs hurt. Your brain can learn fresh maps if you give it new experiences layered on top of the old ones. The location becomes neutral again, not because you forgot, but because you gave your nervous system something newer to associate with that address. Cue-triggered craving architecture. Your phone buzzes and your stomach jumps. Not because you know who it is, but because your brain has learned to associate that sound with them. That's cue-triggered craving, and it's brutally efficient machinery. Every sense in your environment becomes a trigger. Their favorite song on the radio, the coffee shop where you first met, even the time of day you usually texted. Your brain isn't overthinking this. It's running an automatic reflex, the same one that makes smokers crave a cigarette when they see a lighter. The architecture is simple but relentless. A cue fires. Your brain floods with dopamine in anticipation. You think about them. Repeat 10,000 times, and those pathways become neural highways. What makes this so sticky is that you don't need new memories to keep the craving alive. The old ones get recycled every time a cue triggers. You hear their laugh in a crowd, and suddenly you're scrolling through old messages at midnight. You see their favorite color and spend an hour daydreaming about conversations you'll never have. The craving feels like wanting them specifically, but really, it's your nervous system asking your brain for a hit of the dopamine that person taught it to expect. The trap is believing the craving means something profound about your connection. Sometimes it just means your brain learned really well. If you want to break the loop, you have to get boring. Change your route, mute the song, sit with the itch without scratching it. The cue loses power when the reward stops showing up. Your brain learns fast, so does your freedom. Classical conditioning of anticipation. Your phone buzzes and your stomach does a small flip before you even check it. That's Pavlov's dog wearing modern clothes. When someone has been consistently rewarding to contact with, your nervous system learns to treat the possibility of them like the thing itself. A text from them used to come with a dopamine hit. Now just seeing their name light up your screen triggers that same chemical rush, even if what they wrote is just, "Hey." Your brain has wired anticipation and them together so tightly that the threads feel permanent. The waiting becomes electric. You're not actually thinking about what they said. You're thinking about what contact with them means to your body. Safety, excitement, validation, aliveness, proof you matter. Here's where it gets sneaky. You don't need them to actually show up anymore. The ringtone is enough. Sometimes just the idea that they might reach out becomes the entire meal your brain feeds on. Your mind will manufacture reasons to check your phone, spin little scenarios where they finally text back. It's not obsession in the romantic sense. It's your nervous system chasing the reward signal it learned to expect, the same way a slot machine keeps you pulling the lever. The real trap is thinking you're choosing to think about them, that this is love or desire or connection. You're not. You're responding to a bell that's ringing in your own body, and you can't hear the bell because you've lived with it so long. If you want to stop, you have to bore your nervous system into learning something new. Different reward sources, time without the notification, the slow work of building safety elsewhere. Dopamine as wanting, not liking. Reach for your phone to check if they texted back, even though the last 3 times you checked, they hadn't. Your chest is tight. Your fingers move before your brain catches up. That itch, that pull, that's dopamine. And it's almost nothing like happiness. Dopamine isn't the warm glow of contentment. It's hunger. It's the I need to know. Neuroscience calls it the motivation molecule, the one that makes you want, crave, pursue. You can dopamine crave someone you don't even like that much, which is the trap nobody warns you about. Scrolling through their photos at 2 a.m., you're not happy doing it. You're not even enjoying it. But something in your brain screams that the next scroll, the next check, the next refresh might finally satisfy the itch. It won't. That's the architecture of wanting. It's never satisfied by getting. The more you chase, the more dopamine fires, the more you chase. Someone you can't stop thinking about has become a variable reward machine. Sometimes they text back fast, sometimes slow, sometimes warm, sometimes cold. That unpredictability is dopamine's favorite fuel. Your brain isn't obsessed because they're perfect. It's obsessed because the outcome is uncertain and keeps you guessing. And here's what sticks with you. Dopamine and love feel almost identical in the early hunt, but they're moving in opposite directions entirely. Love grows from knowing someone deeply. Dopamine grows from not knowing what they'll do next. If you can't stop thinking about them, ask yourself honestly, are you chasing them or are you chasing the uncertainty itself? That distinction changes everything about how you move forward. Wanting, liking, dissociation. Your brain has split into two rooms. One that desperately wants them, the limbic system running on scarcity, mystery, inconsistency, the dopamine hit of uncertainty, and another that knows with cold clarity that they are not actually good for you. The wanting doesn't need liking. In fact, liking can get in the way. Neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp found that the wanting system and the liking system operate as almost separate neural circuits. You can want someone intensely while barely liking them at all. Wanting operates on craving, on the chase, on what's just out of reach. Liking is slower, warmer, more grounded in actual compatibility. When someone is inconsistent with you, they light up the wanting system like fireworks because your brain is trying to predict them, solve them, earn their approval. But consistency and kindness quietly satisfy the liking system, and your brain stops obsessing. This is why you keep replaying conversations with someone who hurt you, why you refresh their socials, why you imagine scenarios where they finally get it. That's pure wanting, running solo. The liking system, the one that would tell you this person doesn't respect boundaries or they make you smaller, is basically offline. If you actually like someone, the obsession usually fades naturally because your brain stops working so hard. Next time you catch yourself unable to stop thinking about them, ask this quietly. Do I like them or am I addicted to wanting them? That one question can shift everything. Hedonic adaptation to steady presence. You know how the first week of anything feels electric? A new job, a new relationship, a new apartment, and then your brain just normalizes it. That's hedonic adaptation, and it usually makes things feel less intense. But here's where it twists. When someone becomes the steady baseline of your life, your brain stops treating them as a thing that happened and starts treating them as part of the landscape. The nervous system quiets down, the excitement fades, but something stranger happens instead. They become the invisible infrastructure of your daily thoughts. You stop noticing them the way you did on day one, but you also can't imagine the day without them because your brain has already rewired itself around their presence. They're no longer thrilling. They're necessary, and that's actually harder to shake than intensity ever was. A crush fades, a habit doesn't. When someone is woven into your routine, you text them first, you think they'd love this, you measure your day against whether you'll see them. Your brain has stopped treating that as optional. It's like how you don't consciously think about breathing, but you'd notice immediately if the air changed. That person has become part of your mental oxygen. The catch is, you can't even blame it on love or obsession anymore. It's just adaptation. Your nervous system has decided this person is part of normal, and normal is what your mind defaults to when it's not busy with anything else. So they stick around in your head, not because they're extraordinary, but because they're ordinary enough to stay. Boring is what makes someone unforgettable. Contrast effect against past partners. Bite into something genuinely good after months of mediocre food and your taste buds feel shocked. That's not hunger, that's contrast, and it's happening in someone's head when they stack you against their exes. If their last relationship was cold and dismissive, then you arrive warm and attentive, and suddenly you're not just nice, you're extraordinary. You become the measuring stick, and right now, that stick bends your way. The person isn't thinking about you because you're objectively perfect. They're thinking about you because you're radically different from what hurt them before. That's intoxicating. It rewires their dopamine system. But here's the trap. Contrast effects are temporary. The brain adapts. Once you become normal, you're no longer the stunning relief. You're just a person. The glow dims. If the relationship was built on being the opposite of something painful rather than on solid ground, when that contrast fades, so does the pull. Someone can spend weeks, months, even longer stuck in you because you're still riding the not like the others wave. But the thought loop only feels infinite if you both mistake relief for love. Notice whether they actually see you as a person or just see an escape hatch from their past. That distinction matters more than you might think right now, because attraction built on opposition to an ex rarely survives the moment when you stop being the contrast and start being the choice. Anchoring on the first impression. You walk into a room and someone laughs at your joke before you've finished the setup. That person becomes the funny one in your mind, and weeks later, when they say something clumsy, you still hear it through the lens of that opening moment. The brain doesn't actually reset. It builds on what came first. This is anchoring, and it's why someone might be genuinely stuck on you even if things have gotten complicated or distant since the beginning. Your earliest moments together became the blueprint, the version of you they compare everything else to, sometimes without knowing it's happening. If you made them feel seen or safe or wildly alive in those first hours or dates, that became the North Star. Everything after gets measured against it. A text that takes 3 hours to answer gets filtered through "they used to respond instantly," even though people's lives change and stress piles up. The anchor holds even when the evidence says otherwise. What makes this tricky is that it works both ways. If they decided early that you were kind, you could do something selfish and they might rationalize it because the anchor is stronger than the single act. If they decided you were unavailable, you could show up completely and they might still wait for you to pull away because that's the shape of you they locked in first. The weight of a first impression isn't just about initial attraction. It's about the neural pathway laid down before anything more complex has a chance to exist. Primacy effect of early framing. Someone tells you something harsh about a person you've never met, and before you shake their hand, the story is already written. That's the primacy effect, and it's ruthless. Your brain doesn't give equal weight to all information it receives. The first few things you learn about someone get bolded, underlined, and filed as core truth. Everything after has to fight like hell to change that, like trying to rewrite a book where the opening chapter is printed in permanent ink. Here's where it gets sticky with someone you can't stop thinking about. The way they introduce themselves, how they looked that first time, the exact thing they said that made your chest tighten, that's been coded as the real version of them. Even if they've contradicted it 100 times since, your brain still runs the original tape first. They laughed at you once early on. You're looking for that meanness even in their kindest moments. They seemed impossibly confident in the first conversation. You're measuring all their vulnerability against that opening act, and nothing quite lands the same way twice. This is why obsessive thoughts stick around even when fresh evidence says they shouldn't. You're not actually thinking about who they are now. You're thinking about the impression they made when they were still a stranger. Your neural pathways got carved out like a river the first time water flowed through, and that river doesn't reverse direction because the landscape changed. The way someone showed up at the beginning still shapes how your brain processes them today, even when you know better, even when you want to let it go. Recency bias of the last message. Your phone buzzes. They wrote back. 3 words, a little short, maybe even neutral in tone. And suddenly, that's all you can think about for the next 4 hours. Not the 17 warm messages before it, not the laugh you both shared yesterday. Just those 3 words, sitting there like a stone you keep turning over in your palm. Your brain isn't broken. It's just doing what evolution wired it to do, treating the most recent input as the most important data point about what's real right now. The last message becomes the truth, the final verdict, the thing that rewrites how you understand the entire conversation. If they seemed happy 2 days ago, but distant in that last text, the distant version wins. If they were tender all week but sent something hurried this morning, the hurried version gets to be what you believe about them now. This happens because your mind uses recency as a shortcut for relevance. The freshest information feels like the most accurate information, even when it's not. Even when one bad day, a work crisis, a dead phone battery, or simple fatigue could have written that message. What makes this particularly sticky is that you keep checking, keep replaying, keep waiting for the next message to overwrite the last one and tell you a better story. Each new notification just becomes the new stone in your hand, and the cycle starts again. The way through isn't to ignore the last message. It's to remember that a single text is a moment, not a pattern. One rushed reply doesn't erase the entire texture of what came before. Availability heuristic of frequent contact. They showed up in your inbox 3 times this week, and now your brain is pulling a trick. It's treating them as significant simply because they're easy to remember. That's the availability heuristic, your mind's shortcut where easy to recall gets mistaken for must matter. When someone lands in your consciousness regularly, whether by accident or design, your brain starts building false weight around them. They're not necessarily more important to your life. They're just more available to your mind. The trap deepens from there. Because you think about them often, you notice them everywhere. A song they'd like, a joke they'd laugh at, a random memory that surfaces. Each coincidence feels like evidence, when really it's just your brain spotting patterns in noise. Frequent contact does something quieter too. It convinces you the relationship is closer than it is. A few quick messages start feeling like real intimacy. A casual mention makes you believe they were thinking of you. Before long, you've built an entire emotional structure on what might just be someone's texting habits. The thing is, your mind treats popularity as truth. The more available something is, the more real it seems. But availability isn't proof of anything except how much space something occupies in your consciousness. And that space can be engineered by accident. The move isn't to go silent. It's to notice the difference between someone being easy to think about because they're everywhere versus someone who's actually woven into your life. That clarity can keep you from chasing a ghost your brain simply made too convenient. Frequency illusion after attention. Someone new catches your eye at work and suddenly they're everywhere. In the hallway, in meetings, in the coffee line. Your brain didn't conjure them. It finally knows what to look for. This is the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, and it works the same way in their mind toward you. They think about you once, maybe you made them laugh or said something that lodged itself in their memory, and their brain flags you as relevant. Now your name triggers recognition. Your voice echoes differently. A random memory of your conversation surfaces unbidden. The pattern matching system lights up each time, and they notice you more often than they notice most people, which feels from the inside like obsession. But here's where it gets sticky. Attention creates its own feedback loop. The more they think of you, the more their brain scans for evidence you matter, which finds more reasons to think about you, which feels like confirmation that you're stuck in their head. You might be genuinely on their mind, or they might simply be in that narrow window where you're freshly registered as significant, like a song you just heard and now hear everywhere. Either way, their brain isn't lying to them. It's just selectively listening. The quiet part most people miss. Frequency illusion fades when novelty fades, and it can fade fast. Once your name stops triggering that alert signal in their nervous system, the constant thoughts settle down too, sometimes almost overnight. You weren't necessarily unforgettable. You were just freshly visible, and visibility is temporary unless something real anchors it underneath and keeps the pattern alive. Baader-Meinhof reminder cascade. You hear their name on a podcast. 3 days later, a friend mentions they saw someone who looked just like them. Next week, their coffee order appears on a menu board you've never noticed before. The universe, it seems, is obsessed with keeping them in your orbit. But your brain got the signal that this person matters, and now it's become a filter that catches every trace of them in the noise. This is the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, that uncanny feeling that everything points back to them, running on loop inside your attention like a search algorithm you didn't write. Once something lodges in your mind as significant and someone you can't stop thinking about definitely is, your brain starts matching patterns everywhere. That car model you never saw is now everywhere. That song plays constantly. That name shows up in 3 unrelated places in a single week. It's not magic. It's not fate. It's just the price of caring, the cost of letting someone matter. The human mind doesn't process the world neutrally. It processes the world through whatever is currently burning inside it. So, when you see their initials on a street sign or their favorite color on a stranger's jacket, your nervous system lights up as if they put it there deliberately. The cascade feels like proof, like the universe is trying to tell you something, like they're thinking of you too. But the truth is quieter and lonelier. You're thinking of them so hard that your brain literally cannot help but find them everywhere. The reminder isn't a message from them. It's a message from yourself, and it keeps getting louder because you're the one still looking. Salience, network hijacking. Deep in your brain lives a filtering system that decides what gets your attention and what doesn't. The salience network, a cluster of neurons acting like a spotlight that can only point one direction at a time. Normally, it's smart about this. A sudden sound, a threat, a name called across a room. But when you've been emotionally tangled up with someone, your brain has essentially handed them the spotlight switch. Now their face in a photo, a song they played, the street where you met, any of it can grab your attention without permission. You're not daydreaming about them by choice. Your brain is hijacking you. Here's what makes this so sticky. The salience network responds to emotional weight, not logic. It doesn't care if you've decided to move on or that thinking about them hurts. It cares about the charge, the intensity of what you felt, the unresolved loops, the story you keep replaying. So you notice them first in a crowd, you hear their voice in background noise, your eyes find their social media even when you're trying not to look. It feels like weakness, like failure of willpower, but it's actually a system that's doing exactly what it was built to do, protecting what matters. The trap is believing you can force the spotlight away through sheer discipline, you can't. The real path is slower. Stop feeding the fire, less checking in, less storytelling about what it all meant, less fuel. Gradually, the salience network stops treating them like a threat or treasure and finds something else to guard. Attentional bias toward the beloved. Your phone buzzes. Before you even look, part of your brain already knows it might be them. And that tiny expectation alone makes you scan your screen faster, process each notification with sharper attention. This is what happens when someone matters. Your spotlight narrows, not because you decide to, but because your nervous system decides for you. Their name in a crowded email thread pops out like it's neon. A song they mentioned plays 3 times in a row and your chest tightens. Psychologists call this attentional bias, the brain's tendency to notice what it cares about, the way a parent hears their child's cry in a noisy room. But here's the twist. The more you notice them everywhere, the more wired your brain becomes to keep looking. Every small sign gets magnified. A delayed text becomes evidence they're busy thinking about something, probably you. A mutual friend's story gets parsed for hidden meaning. You are not going crazy. You are literally seeing a different world than someone who doesn't have this bias. Your attention has been hijacked, not by choice, but by chemistry and repetition. The sneaky part is that noticing them more makes you think about them more, which makes your brain allocate even more attention to their signals next time. It's a loop that feeds itself. The way out isn't to force yourself to stop looking. That usually backfires. Instead, try deliberately widening your attention. Notice other people. Read something absorbing. Let your brain remember what else deserves the spotlight. The bias doesn't vanish, but you get your peripheral vision back. Spotlight bias of imagined watching. You said something awkward in a room full of people and felt them all turn inward to replay it over and over, except they didn't. They were already thinking about their own coffee, their own worry, the crack in their phone screen, the small, urgent pull of their own lives. This gap between what you believe people are noticing about you and what they actually notice is spotlight bias, and it works differently when obsession is in the picture. If I'm thinking about them constantly, you reason, they must be thinking about me constantly too. The logic feels foolproof. It isn't. We're all mostly invisible to each other, each wrapped in our own urgent inner theater. But here's the twist. Someone can be thinking about you a lot while still operating at a fraction of the intensity you imagine. You replay conversations at 3 a.m. They mentioned you once to a friend and moved on. Your brain doesn't see it that way, though. When you're occupied with someone, their mental spotlight on you swells in your imagination to match your own burning focus. You unconsciously assume it's reciprocal. One text becomes evidence of constant thought. A forgotten reply becomes careful distance. Both extremes come from the same bias. Your mind has built a fun house where their attention mirrors yours perfectly, symmetrical, consuming, all-consuming. Breaking that mirror takes real work. What they're actually thinking about you is probably gentler, simpler, quieter than the story you've constructed. Letting that be enough is where the loop finally loosens. Illusion of transparency in longing. You've been thinking about someone so relentlessly that your brain insists, almost demands, that they must feel it somehow. The sheer weight of your attention has to be radiating outward, a signal they can't possibly ignore. That's the illusion of transparency at its cruelest, the way your mind mistakes internal intensity for external broadcast. When obsession takes hold, your thoughts about them become so vivid, so textured with detail. Their laugh, the thing they said last week, what they might be doing right now, that it feels present and undeniable to you. Your brain is doing double duty, living your own life while running theirs in parallel, filling in all the blanks with your own hopes and fears. So when they don't text back, when they're distant, when they laugh at someone else's joke instead, the sting lands differently. It feels like a betrayal because in your internal landscape, you've already lived 1,000 moments with them. You've already built the history. You're already there, but they're just existing, glancing at their phone once, forgetting what you said in passing, feeling none of the weight you feel, believing that the intensity of your thinking somehow equals the intensity of connection is the trap that keeps you spinning. It doesn't. Your attention is a mirror facing inward, and they're not looking at it. The person you can't stop thinking about might have no idea you're thinking about them at all. They're not receiving the broadcast you're so sure you're sending. What you're actually learning, whether you want to or not, is how to sit with the strange solitude of occupying someone's mind while they occupy none of yours. Mind reading projection of intent. You replay a conversation where they seemed distant, and your brain fills in the blanks. They're upset with me, they're losing interest, they're thinking about someone else. None of that is on tape. You invented it. And now you're thinking about them constantly, not because of what they actually did, but because you've assigned them secret motives and you're running defense plays against a game only you're playing. This is mind-reading projection. You take their ambiguous behavior, splash your own fears onto it like a Rorschach test, and then treat your invented interpretation as fact. The dangerous part is how sticky it becomes. If they forget to text back, your mind goes, they don't care anymore. If they're quiet, it becomes, they're mad at me. If they laugh with someone else, it transforms into, they like them better. Each invented story loops through your head hundreds of times a day because you're not just thinking about them, you're thinking about the version of them you constructed in your anxiety. Here's what matters. Their actual behavior is one thing. Your story about their intent is another entirely. And you can spend weeks, months orbiting someone based almost entirely on a narrative you wrote in a moment of doubt. The way out starts small. Next time you catch yourself mind-reading their feelings, pause and ask, what did they actually say or do with no interpretation? Separate the fact from the fear story. It sounds simple, but it stops the loop cold because you're no longer haunted by them. You're finally haunted by nothing but your own guess. Egocentric simulation of their thoughts. Right now, someone is running a mental simulation of your entire inner world using only their own mind as the template. And they're almost certainly getting it wrong in ways that feel completely true to them. They're not reading you. They're projecting. When they picture you thinking about them, they're usually picturing what they'd feel if the roles reversed. You went quiet for a day. They've already written a whole screenplay where you're reconsidering everything. You said something brief. In their simulation, that means distance or anger brewing beneath. That's egocentric simulation, where your actual thoughts don't matter because they've replaced them with an echo of themselves. The real trap is that they now operate entirely from this fictional version of your inner life, and because they believe it so deeply, it shapes everything they do next. They might apologize for something you never cared about, pull away because they think you're angry, or reach out obsessively because their simulation says you're lonely. Meanwhile, you're just living your life, completely unaware they've been having a long conversation with a hologram wearing your face. And here's what keeps them locked in that loop. Their simulation feels true to them precisely because it came from their own emotional architecture. It carries the weight of their own fears and triggers, so it has a kind of gravitational reality they can't shake free from. They keep thinking about you, keep refining the model, keep testing the imagined boundaries of your thoughts, all while you exist nowhere near their actual focus. What they're really obsessed with is the version of you they built alone in the dark. Theory of mind overuse. You text someone a joke and they don't laugh. Your brain swings into overdrive. Are they mad at me? Did I say something wrong? Maybe they think I'm annoying. 10 minutes later, you're deep inside their head, constructing entire emotional narratives about their feelings, their judgment, whether they're losing interest. They might have just been busy. They might not have read it yet, but your mind doesn't care. It keeps spinning theories. Theory of mind is normally healthy. It's how you navigate other people's inner lives, their feelings, their intentions, their beliefs. But when you're anxious about someone or can't stop thinking about them, you flip into overdrive and become a mind reader who mostly reads fiction. Their silence becomes proof they're pulling away. A short reply becomes evidence they're losing patience. You analyze word choices, emoji use, message timing like you're cracking a code that might not exist. The real trap: the more uncertain you are about where you stand, the harder your brain works to fill the blanks. It's solving an equation with missing variables, so it invents them, and each invented theory feels real because you constructed it so carefully, wove it through so much detail. Here's the thing: you can't stop thinking about them, partly because your brain is exhausted from doing this invisible labor, this constant mind reading that never actually answers anything. The way out isn't to stop thinking about them entirely. It's to catch yourself mid-theory and ask, what do I actually know versus what am I guessing? That distinction, held long enough, loosens the grip and gives your mind permission to rest. Counterfactual replaying of alternatives. 3 a.m. and your mind splits into branches. What if you'd said something different? What if they'd texted first? What if you'd been funnier or warmer in that one moment? Your brain isn't replaying a video. It's generating ghost versions of what could have gone another way, and it cannot stop running them like a stuck record at the same painful groove. This is counterfactual thinking, and it grabs hardest when ambiguity or regret lingers between you. If things ended badly, your mind becomes a detective, hunting for the exact moment where you could have altered everything. If things felt unfinished, you're drafting the scene you wish had happened, rehearsing it until it feels as real as if it actually occurred. The cruelest part is that the more you replay alternatives, the more your brain treats them as genuine missed opportunities rather than fantasies. The version where you were braver, quieter, more available, or more aloof starts to feel like an actual life you could have lived, not just a story you invented at midnight. And that sense of lost possibility keeps the person alive in your thoughts because they're tied to the version of yourself that exists only in those counterfactual moments. The self you wish you'd been. You're not really chasing them anymore. You're chasing the life you imagine should have been. Next time you catch yourself in that what-if spiral, try naming it out loud. I'm replaying alternatives. Just that simple marking of the difference between what happened and what your anxious brain is inventing often breaks the spell. If only regret loops. 3 a.m. and your brain offers you a perfect alternate timeline where you said something different, where you didn't pull back, where courage won instead of silence. In that version, everything shifts. They love you, you're together, life makes sense. Then reality crashes back, and the gap between what happened and what could have happened becomes all you can think about. Your mind keeps running the simulation, convinced that one more replay, one more analysis, and you'll somehow unlock the answer, fix the past, change their mind. It won't work. Regret has a peculiar disguise. It poses as hope. Every if only thought feels productive because it could be true. Every rehash feels like you're getting closer to understanding what went wrong, how to salvage things with them. But you're not closer, you're stuck, replaying the same moment while the actual person moves further away. Meanwhile, you're arguing with a ghost version that lives only in your head. The loop stays alive because it doesn't feel like suffering. It feels like you're still trying, still connected to them. You're not. What makes this particularly sticky is that regret thinking mimics the work of genuine reflection. It borrows the language of learning. So you keep digging, keep running the simulation, mistaking repetition for insight. The way through isn't to think harder or replay louder. When you catch yourself in the loop, name it plainly. There's the regret loop, not as judgment, just as recognition. Don't fight it, just notice. That small shift from believing the thought to watching it drains its power faster than you'd expect. Upward counterfactual sting. Rewind that conversation from last week in your head. If only you'd said something sharper, they'd still be texting. If only you'd arrived 10 minutes earlier. If only that joke hadn't landed flat. Your mind is doing mental acrobatics, constructing alternate futures where one small tweak rewrites everything, and that's what keeps them drilling through your thoughts like a splinter you can't quite reach. Psychologists call this upward counterfactual thinking, and it's especially vicious when the person matters. The sting isn't actually about what happened. It's about what almost could have happened, what you're now convinced nearly existed. Your brain generates these near-miss scenarios. You almost caught the ball, but it slipped through your fingers. And that near-miss quality is what makes it loop endlessly. If you'd failed completely, you'd grieve faster and move on. But a world where one small change rewrites the entire outcome, that's the kind of story your brain treats as a real loss, something you almost had rather than something that never existed. What makes this cruel is that the thinking feels productive. You replay it again, rewind it again, convinced that analyzing hard enough will unlock the secret that could have saved it, but every replay only deepens the neural groove, and the person becomes less real, more like a ghost made of your own regret. When you catch yourself mid-time travel, pause and ask, am I mourning what actually happened or mourning a story I invented? That small shift from the imagined could have been back to the what actually was is how the person finally starts to fade. Goal shielding by an unmet goal. You spent months imagining what it would be like to be with someone. You had a plan, a timeline, maybe even a version of the future sketched out in your head. Then it didn't happen. They pulled away, chose someone else, or the moment just evaporated. Now here's what neuroscience gets at. Your brain doesn't delete that unfinished story. Instead, it keeps returning to it like a browser tab you forgot to close, replaying the scene over and over to figure out where the script broke. Your mind treats an incomplete goal, especially one tied to another person, as unfinished business that demands resolution. So it loops. It picks apart conversations for clues you missed. It imagines alternative endings where you said something different, did something bolder. It constructs elaborate reasons why they're thinking about you too, because if they're thinking about you, the goal isn't really dead yet, is it? The more you replay it, the more cognitive real estate it consumes. Your brain is literally trying to protect you from the pain of "it's over" by pretending the story is still in progress, still fixable. Closure feels impossible because closure would mean accepting that particular future doesn't exist anymore. What actually helps, name the goal explicitly. I want it to be with this person. And then consciously retire it, not pretend it never mattered, not jump to someone else. Just let yourself feel the small grief of an unbuilt thing, then intentionally point your mind toward goals that are actually yours to pursue right now. The replaying stops when the goal finally, quietly closes. Current concerns and thought sampling. You're in a meeting when someone says something vaguely familiar, a phrase that echoes a conversation from last week, and suddenly you're replaying the whole thing, wondering if you said the wrong thing. If they're mad, if they've been thinking about it too, here's what's actually happening. Your brain isn't haunted by them specifically. It's haunted by whatever you're worried about right now, and they're the actor in that worry. This is thought sampling. Your mind grabs the most relevant person to your current concern and loops them in. If you're anxious about being misunderstood, you'll sample memories of them misunderstanding you. If you're worried about rejection, suddenly every neutral text feels like proof. If you're stressed about whether you matter, their face becomes the test case. The machinery is automatic, almost merciful in its logic. Your brain is trying to solve something, so it reaches for the most relevant evidence, and that evidence keeps pointing back to them. But here's the quiet truth. They might barely remember that conversation. They might not be thinking about you at all because you're actively worried about approval, about being seen as competent, about not being forgotten. Your brain keeps sampling them as the character in your anxiety script. The person isn't the problem. Your current concern is. So when you catch yourself looping about them, pause and ask what you're actually anxious about. Is it about them, or have they just become the stand-in for something in your life you can't quite name? That distinction matters because the loop doesn't stop by convincing yourself they're thinking of you. It stops by addressing what you're genuinely worried about. Implementation intention residue. You make a plan to call someone at 7 p.m. and all day your brain is half listening for that moment. 6:30 rolls around and you're still thinking about them, rehearsing what you'll say, imagining how they'll react. Then life happens. You get busy, you lose nerve, you don't call, but here's the thing, that plan you set doesn't just evaporate. Your brain built a little bridge toward that person, a mental pathway that stays active and primed even after you abandon the original intention. Psychologists call this implementation intention residue, and it's one of the stickiest hooks in memory. When you set a specific plan involving someone, I'll text them tomorrow, I'll run into them at the gym, your mind doesn't treat it as a casual maybe. It treats it like a task waiting to fire. So you keep looping back. You rewrite the conversation. You wonder if they're thinking of you too. You catch yourself at random moments suddenly composing messages you'll never send. The residue lingers because your brain is still partially oriented toward that future moment, that specific trigger, that person. It's especially potent with people you care about because the emotional weight makes the intention stronger. Even months later, certain times of day or familiar places can reactivate that old planned sense, pulling their face back into focus. You'll be doing dishes and their name surfaces. You'll pass a cafe you talked about going to together. The irony cuts deep. The harder you planned to reconnect, the longer they haunt your thoughts afterward. Your brain basically refuses to let go of unfinished business. especially business you chose to leave unfinished yourself. Attention residue between tasks. 3 minutes into your email and their words are still looping through your head, not because you're obsessing, but because your brain hasn't actually switched tracks yet. That ghost of them lingering in your attention is what researchers call attention residue, and it explains why certain people stick with you even when you're trying to think about literally anything else. Your mind doesn't work like closing a browser tab. When you shift from one task or person to another, a piece of your cognitive energy stays tethered to what you just left behind. If the interaction was emotional, charged, unresolved, or meaningful, that residue gets thicker and stickier. You're doing your groceries and suddenly their laugh replays in full stereo. You're half listening to someone else talk and they materialize in your thoughts unbidden. The person isn't haunting you because they're your soulmate. They're haunting you because your attention system hasn't fully disengaged from the previous scene. This is why people who occupy intense emotional space, whether conflict, attraction, or deep connection, can feel omnipresent in your mind. Your brain is literally struggling to context switch away from them, and it will keep failing until you give it permission to land somewhere else. The practical move: if you want your attention to actually go somewhere new, you need a real transition, not just closing Slack and opening a document. A walk, a shower, 5 minutes of music, something that signals to your nervous system that the previous conversation is genuinely over. Otherwise, you're asking your brain to pretend it finished when it's still half there, and that person gets to rent space in your head for free. Task switching cost of preoccupation. You're at work trying to finish a report, but they drift through your mind and suddenly you've reread the same sentence 3 times without absorbing a word. Your brain isn't failing you. It's just expensive to evict someone from your thoughts once they've moved in. Every time you switch back to the task in front of you, there's a real cognitive tax. Neuroscientists call this task switching cost, and preoccupation is a master at exploiting it. When someone is occupying your mental space, your attention doesn't just split equally. The person gets a kind of priority override, like a background app that keeps pinging even when you've supposedly closed it. You think you're working, but a chunk of your processing power is running a loop. Did I text back? What are they doing? Did I say something wrong? The switching itself, pulling focus back to the spreadsheet, pulling it back to them, pulling it back again, that friction burns energy faster than any single task would alone. What makes this genuinely draining is that the harder you try to focus, the more you notice the preoccupation, which deepens the preoccupation itself. It becomes a self-fueling cycle that exhausts you from the inside. The person feels like they're stealing your attention, when really your brain is running an exhausting parallel process, one that no amount of discipline can simply shut down. If you're noticing this happening, the antidote isn't willpower, it's acknowledging the cost openly instead of fighting it invisibly. That small honesty, I'm preoccupied right now, this will take longer, often quiets the urgency and lets you actually return to what matters. Working memory occupation. You're halfway through a movie when your mind cuts to a text exchange from last week, the one where they went quiet mid-conversation. Your eyes track the screen, but your working memory, that mental workspace where you actually hold and manipulate information right now, is elsewhere. Someone else has moved in. It's not necessarily love or obsession or attraction. It's that your brain filed this person under unresolved, and unresolved things have a magnetic pull on attention. A tone that didn't land right, a response that didn't quite make sense, a small inconsistency that keeps tugging. Your mind cycles back to it like a tongue finding a loose tooth, because working memory is designed to hold onto gaps until they're solved. You're not choosing to think about them. Your cognitive system is simply doing what it evolved to do, trying to close the loop. The brutal part is that some loops don't close. There may be no resolution coming, no explanation, no moment of clarity, but your brain doesn't know that yet, so it keeps spinning. What did they really mean? Why that exact phrasing? What would I say back? How would they respond to that? Each cycle feels like you're inching closer to an answer, but you're mostly just rotating the same thought under different angles, hoping one will finally lock. To actually free up that mental real estate, you need either genuine closure or a conscious decision to sit with the ambiguity. Neither happens fast, and neither feels good at first, but choosing to accept the unknown is the only move that actually stops the cycle. Cognitive load of secrecy. Think about the last time you kept something quiet about someone, a feeling you never voiced, a thing they said that stung, a line you crossed together. Now think about how much energy went into managing that silence. Your brain treats hidden information like an open browser tab. It hums in the background, demanding attention even when you're trying to focus elsewhere. You rehearse what you'd say if it came out. You monitor your words around mutual friends. You calculate which details are safe, which ones might slip. That constant mental choreography is essentially a spotlight that keeps the person front and center in your thoughts, even when you're supposedly moving on. Neuroscience shows us that the harder you clamp down on a thought, the louder it screams. Add secrecy to that equation, and you've basically installed the person as a permanent background process on your mind. You're not just remembering them anymore. You're actively managing the memory, turning it into work. Every conversation becomes a risk assessment. Every silence becomes something to guard against. The person becomes part of your security system, woven so deep into what you're protecting that they're never quite absent. There's a reason people sometimes feel lighter after telling a long-buried truth. Not because the secret loses its charge, but because they stop paying the cognitive rent on hiding it. If you're caught in loops about someone, try pausing and asking, what am I keeping quiet? Protecting them, protecting yourself, protecting the story, because sometimes the path out isn't forgetting. It's simply stopping the work of hiding. Emotional labor of restraint. Watch what happens the moment you decide not to think about someone. You swear off checking their socials, you vow to stop replaying that conversation, and suddenly your mental energy spikes like you've hit an alarm. It's the paradox of suppression. The effort of not thinking about them requires so much cognitive fuel that they stay front and center anyway. Every time you catch yourself drifting back and pull away, you're burning energy. You're not just avoiding the thought, you're constantly policing it, which keeps them lodged in your attention like a burglar alarm nobody turns off. Your brain has to hold two competing things at once, the person and the rule forbidding you from thinking about them. That friction is exhausting. The harder you push against the thought, the more your mind protests, like a kid told not to imagine chocolate cake. Now it's all they see. So people trapped thinking about someone might not have weak willpower. They're caught in a loop where restraint itself keeps that person alive in their head, breathing, present, impossible to escape. After weeks of this internal white-knuckling, actually thinking about them becomes a weird relief, a break from the strain of holding back. The escape hatch isn't discipline or a stronger mental barrier. It's redirecting that emotional labor somewhere else entirely. into work that demands your full attention, into genuine presence with people physically in front of you, into curiosity about your own life and what you actually want. When you stop fighting the thought and start filling the void with something real, the grip loosens on its own. Suppressed expression amplifies feeling. You bite your tongue, you don't call, you don't text the thing you've rehearsed in your head 100 times, and then something strange happens. That unsaid thing grows teeth. It occupies more mental real estate than if you just said it out loud, because your mind keeps generating new versions of what might happen, what could go wrong, what they might think if you did speak up. This is the psychological boomerang effect. The harder you try not to think about someone, the more your brain treats them like an unfinished thought demanding completion. Every suppressed word, every message you stalled on, every moment you chose safety over honesty becomes a splinter your mind can't stop probing. You replay conversations looking for where you should have spoken up. You imagine alternate versions where you did, so vivid they almost feel real. Meanwhile, the actual person has no idea why you're so present in your own head, so permanent in your own thoughts. The feeling doesn't fade because it never got expressed. It got compressed, and compressed feelings don't shrink. They densify, become heavier, stickier, more magnetic to your attention. Your brain keeps circling back, hoping maybe this time you'll find the right words, the right timing, the formula that makes it safe to say what you actually feel. But that loop only breaks when you do something, write it, say it, or consciously release it. Suppression isn't restraint, it's fertilizer for obsession, and if someone keeps haunting your thoughts, ask yourself what you haven't said yet. Ambivalence sustains attention. Think about the person you genuinely can't categorize. Not clearly good, not clearly bad, but both braided together in ways that shift depending on the day. Your brain knows how to file away certainty. Someone is kind or cruel, present or gone, worth your time or not. Those files close, but mixed feelings, they're a puzzle your mind refuses to stop solving. When you feel attraction and doubt at once, warmth and hurt stacked on top of each other, your nervous system treats it like an open question that demands an answer. The person who was attentive but then ghosted, who made you feel seen and simultaneously small, who felt right in the moment but wrong in hindsight, they occupy more real estate in your head than someone who was simply terrible. Your brain is a pattern completion engine. It hates loose threads. Ambivalence is the ultimate loose thread, and here's where it gets darker. When the other person is themselves mixed about you, your system goes into overdrive. You're constantly scanning for signals. Are they pulling closer or away? Do they actually care, or are they just bored? That state of suspended uncertainty keeps you neurologically wired, like your whole system is waiting for the plot to resolve. Certainty allows rest. Ambivalence demands vigilance. The stickiness isn't because they're special, it's because they're unfinished. If you catch yourself returning to someone over and over, ask whether you're actually drawn to them or drawn to the unresolved mystery they represent. Sometimes the clarity you need isn't about understanding them better, it's about understanding that some equations don't deserve to be solved. Approach avoidance, conflict tension, your thumb hovers over their name in your phone. You want to reach out. You don't want to reach out. You set the phone down. 2 minutes later, you pick it back up. This isn't confusion. It's your nervous system caught between two equally strong forces pulling in opposite directions, and that tension doesn't evaporate. It loops. Your brain keeps recycling their memory because one part of you genuinely wants to move closer. The connection, the possibility, the thrill of them. while another part is equally convinced that doing so is dangerous. Rejection, vulnerability, losing yourself in someone else's orbit. These fears aren't small whispers. They're genuine gravity wells holding as much weight as the pull toward them does. So your mind circles endlessly, searching for an answer to a question you can't even ask out loud. Should I or shouldn't I? The cruelest mechanics. The moment you lean toward one direction, the other force snaps back harder. Get closer and the fear flares. Back away and the longing intensifies. You stay suspended in that middle space, thinking about them not because you're in love or because you hate them, but because the unresolved tension itself demands settlement. Your brain is waiting for permission to stop fighting. That permission comes when you actually decide not suppress the fear or ignore the pull, but consciously choose a direction and let yourself feel whatever follows. The intrusive thoughts usually quiet only when the conflict finally does. Anxious attachment hyperactivation. When your phone goes silent and someone with anxious attachment starts spiraling, they're not really thinking about you, they're running from a ghost. Your silence flips a switch that learned long ago that quiet means danger, that not knowing means abandoned, that if they don't stay vigilant, something irreplaceable will slip through their fingers. So their brain does what it was trained to do, obsess. They replay your last message like an audio technician hunting for proof you still care, and when they can't find it, the uncertainty itself becomes intolerable. They're not checking their phone because they expect you to message. They're checking because the not knowing feels like drowning. Every interaction gets reconstructed. Every pause in your replies becomes evidence they failed. Here's what most people miss. The looping thoughts aren't actually about you at all. They're about abandonment terror, and you've just become the vessel where that ancient fear comes alive. Your face is on it, but your face is interchangeable. You could be anyone who triggers that fragile nervous system. The person obsessing feels like they can't stop because stopping means facing the void, and their mind is willing to do anything to avoid that unbearable emptiness. It's a survival strategy wrapped in hypervigilance, learned from people who left or withheld, from childhood moments that taught them, stay vigilant or lose everything. If you're on the receiving end of this intensity, the hardest truth is that reassurance becomes a trap. More you give, more they need. The clearest boundary you can offer is the kindest one. Consistency without rescue, presence without merging, avoidant deactivation, and rebound longing. You pull away hard, decide you're done, delete their number, mute them everywhere. And then 3 weeks later, you're scrolling their Instagram at 2 a.m. wondering what they're doing. This isn't weakness. It's a specific pattern called deactivation, and it has a rebound built in. Here's what happens. When someone gets close enough to feel real, avoidant people often flip a switch. The proximity triggers old fears of control, of losing yourself, of being hurt. So your nervous system hits eject. You convince yourself you never wanted them anyway. You feel relief, maybe even righteousness. But here's the trap. The moment distance is restored and the threat is gone, your brain stops screaming warnings. And now, paradoxically, you start to miss them. The person you rejected becomes the person you think about constantly because absence rewires the threat. They're no longer dangerous, they're just gone. So you ruminate, reread old conversations, create fantasies about how it could have been different. It's not that they were right for you, it's that your avoidance system needed the distance to feel safe, and now that it has it, another part of you aches for what you pushed away. The real kicker is that you might cycle through this again if they came back, because the closeness would trigger that same eject button all over again. The trick is recognizing this pattern before it owns you. When you notice yourself romanticizing someone you actively rejected, pause and ask if you're missing them or missing the relief that distance gave you. That distinction changes everything and might finally break the loop. Fearful, avoidant push-pull cycle. There's someone who can't decide if they want you closer or farther away, and so they pull you in, then push you out, then pull you back again. You're caught in a loop that feels exhausting from the outside and genuinely chaotic from theirs. The mechanism is simple but merciless. They're terrified of both abandonment and intimacy at the same time, so every move toward closeness triggers a panic that feels like suffocation, and every distance triggers the fear of being left behind. So they oscillate. They text you obsessively, then vanish for days. They make plans, then cancel. They tell you they need you, then act like you're suffocating them. And here's why you can't stop thinking about them, because you're constantly solving a puzzle that has no solution. Your brain keeps running the equation. If I just say the right thing, do the right thing, prove I'm safe enough, maybe they'll stop running, but they're not running from you. They're running from the version of closeness their nervous system learned was dangerous. And that's not a thing you can logic away or love away. The cruelest part is that the more stable you become, the safer you try to make it, the more chaotic they often get. Because safety itself feels like a trap to them. Your consistency becomes invisible because it doesn't match the turbulence they expect. So you stay stuck, rehearsing conversations, trying to decode their behavior, because leaving means accepting that no amount of your steadiness can fix their internal civil war. And that's the thought that won't leave you alone. Attachment injury replay. There's a moment, maybe a text that went unanswered, or a conversation where they chose someone else's side, and your brain decides, this is proof they don't care. Not a bad day, not a misunderstanding. Proof. That injury gets filed away, and now every interaction with them gets filtered through it. A delayed response? Confirmation. A joke that lands wrong? More confirmation. You're not really upset about today. You're upset about the wound that opened in the past and never quite closed. This is the trap of attachment injury replay. Your nervous system treats old hurt like breaking news, and it keeps replaying the moment that made you feel unseen or abandoned. The brutal part is that they might not even know they did it. You could be hurt because they didn't call during a hard week, and they genuinely didn't know you needed that call. But your attachment system doesn't care about their innocence. It cares about the feeling of not mattering, and it will mine every future interaction for evidence that you were right to be afraid. So you think about them constantly, not because you want them, but because you're trying to solve the unsolvable riddle of why they made you feel small. The real shift happens when you notice that the person triggering the replay isn't actually the person who caused the original wound. Sometimes the person you can't stop thinking about is just a screen for an older ghost, an earlier abandonment playing out again. That distinction changes everything about how you move forward and who you're really trying to reach. Earned security through consistent warmth. There's someone in your life who doesn't make you wonder where you stand. They show up the same way every time. Not perfectly, not without flaws, but reliably warm. No mood swings that leave you guessing. No emotional setup and letdown. You know what to expect. And that predictability rewires something deep. Your nervous system actually relaxes around them. That person becomes the gravitational center of your thoughts, not because they're mysterious or because you're chasing them, but because you finally stopped bracing for impact. Attachment research calls this earned security. It's what happens when someone proves through thousands of small moments that you're safe with them. A text back within hours, not days. A tone that stays even when they're tired. The way they remember what matters to you without you having to remind them. These tiny consistencies accumulate into a felt sense of being held, and your brain wants to stay near that. You think about them because your system recognizes them as a secure base, a person you can return to without negotiation or performance. The stickiness isn't about fantasy or longing, it's about rest. Your mind keeps returning to them the way your body seeks warmth on a cold night. It's not obsession, it's safety finally finding its shape. If this is someone in your orbit, you already know why they matter. But here's the thing, that same consistency you crave in others, you get to build it in yourself too. Show yourself up the same way they do, and watch how differently you move through the world. Trauma bond intermittency. There's a pattern you've maybe lived but never named. Someone hurts you badly, then disappears for weeks, then reaches out like nothing happened. You feel a rush, relief, longing, confusion all at once. Your nervous system goes haywire. That person doesn't just live in your head rent-free. They've become a slot machine. You keep pulling the lever because sometimes they come through and sometimes they ghost. And the unpredictability is what makes the lever impossible to stop pulling. This is intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the stickiest behavioral traps our brains can fall into. When someone alternates between harm and kindness randomly, your attachment system gets hooked harder than it would from consistent care or even consistent cruelty. Your brain is literally optimized to chase that pattern. It's the most powerful way to build compulsion in any animal. They say or do something tender after months of silence, and suddenly you're rewriting the whole story. The pain gets reframed as depth. The abandonment becomes proof of complexity. You can't stop thinking about them because your nervous system is trained to monitor for the next hit of connection, scanning for the next text, the next gesture, the next moment. They suddenly make you matter again. The key to breaking free isn't willpower or logic, it's starving the slot machine. No checking their socials, no keeping their number, no negotiations about staying friends. Your brain has been conditioned, and conditioning breaks only through consistent new patterns, not through thinking your way out of it. Sometimes the thought loop doesn't end because you end it. It ends because you finally stop feeding it. Idealization, devaluation, oscillation. You know that feeling when someone feels like a miracle one week and a mistake the next? When their text lands like gospel, then 3 days later feels like a performance? That whiplash is the machine running, and your mind is the hamster wheel turning it. What happens is this. Your brain latches onto a few real qualities. Their laugh, their ambition, how they listened that one time, and inflates them into a whole narrative. They become the solution to something you didn't know you were looking for. Then reality stutters. They forget to text back. They say something ordinary. Their flaws suddenly feel enormous because the gap between the hero you built and the human you're actually with is massive. So your mind does what it does best. It swings hard the other way. They're not worth it. They never were. But here's what keeps you obsessing. The oscillation itself becomes addictive. The high of idealization, the crash of devaluation, the small moment of forgiveness that sparks hope again. It's a loop your nervous system gets hooked on. You cannot stop thinking about them because they have become a symbol of something far larger than themselves, a proof you keep seeking that you can feel rescued by another person. The actual person almost doesn't exist anymore. What matters is the story your brain keeps rewriting, the way the swing itself feels like aliveness. The real escape is noticing the pendulum motion itself, not blaming the person standing in its path. That's what stops the wheel from turning. Limerence intrusive ideation. 3 in the morning and your brain won't stop replaying a conversation from last week, a text they sent, a laugh, the way they looked at you. You're not choosing to think about them. The thoughts just arrive, unbidden, sticky, impossible to dismiss. That's limerence intrusive ideation, when your mind has hijacked the person into your mental foreground and keeps looping them like a song stuck in your head, except the song runs 24/7 with your whole nervous system lit up. The neurochemistry here is real. Your brain is flooded with dopamine every time they cross your mind, which trains your attention like a reward system. The more you try not to think about them, the harder they push back, because suppression itself is a form of attention. So your brain keeps serving up new angles, what they really meant, what they might be doing, what you should have said. And each loop feels like thinking, when really it's your reward circuitry spinning on a feedback loop. The trap isn't love alone. It's that your brain learned they equal a hit of neurochemistry, and now it's running a vending machine for your own thoughts. The way out doesn't start with willpower. It starts with a small shift. These thoughts are not invitations to analyze. They're just misfired attention, and wrestling them tighter only feeds the loop. Redirect instead. A walk. A real conversation with someone else. Something that asks your brain to process the present moment. Your mind will fight it hard, but eventually the loop runs out of fuel.